The crystal goblet chimed against the silver knife, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the murmur of the Christmas party like a gunshot. My son-in-law William stood at the head of the table, his face flushed with expensive wine and arrogance. He looked down at me, seated at the far end of the table in the draftiest spot near the kitchen door. A toast to Lucas, William announced, his voice booming with that fake conviviality that always made my skin crawl. To our resident survivor. Still tough as nails even after that nasty tumble down the cottage stairs last week. I guess the old man finally learned his lesson about wandering around in the dark. The guests, a collection of William's high finance colleagues and their jewelry-laden wives, chuckled politely. They looked at me with that specific brand of pity reserved for the elderly and the irrelevant. I sat there, every breath a negotiation with agony. My ribs were cracked, grinding against each other with the slightest movement. I couldn't laugh. I couldn't even sigh deeply. I just sat there in the pain that had become my constant companion for the last 7 days. I looked at William. I saw the smugness in his eyes, the certainty that he had won, that I was just a senile old black man taking up space in his pristine white world. He thought fear would keep me silent. He was wrong. I smiled. It was a slow, deliberate curling of the lips. Then, ignoring the shooting fire in my chest, I stood up. I reached for the hem of my festive sweater and lifted it. The room went deathly silent. "You are right, William," I said, my voice steady and cold. Someone definitely learned a lesson about what happens in the dark. It just wasn't me. On my dark skin, the bruising was a horrific map of violence. But amidst the purple and black swelling on my flank, there was a mark that gravity could never make. It was the distinct, undeniable outline of a handprint, a hand that had pushed, not saved. William's face went white. The glass in his hand trembled, spilling a drop of crimson wine onto the white tablecloth like a drop of blood. Welcome to my channel. I am Lucas Carter. I am 70 years old, and 3 days ago the man you just heard toasting my health tried to murder me. Before I tell you what happened next in that dining room, please take a second to like this video and subscribe. Leave a comment telling me which city you are watching from. I want to know how far the truth travels. Now let me take you back to the moment I sat down at that table 10 minutes before the toast that shattered everything. The dining room smelled of roasted duck and pine needles, a scent that usually brought me peace, but tonight it smelled like danger. I was seated at the very corner of the long mahogany table. It was not a mistake. It was a statement. While the other 12 guests ate off fine bone china with gold rims, my plate was different. It was heavy, thick stoneware, slightly chipped at the edge. The kind of plate you give to a child you don't trust or a dog you don't like. I looked around the table. I was the only black face in a sea of wealthy white suburbanites. This was my daughter Jasmine's home, but she was nowhere near me. She was seated by William's side, looking anxious, her eyes darting toward me every few seconds with a mix of worry and warning. She knew I was hurt. She knew the story William had spun about my clumsiness, but she didn't know the truth. Not yet. I shifted my weight, and a sharp lance of pain shot up my left side. I grit my teeth, refusing to make a sound. I have been an engineer for 40 years. I know about stress points. I know about load-bearing capacities, and right now, my body was a structure on the verge of collapse. But my mind was a steel trap. William was holding court at the center of the table, recounting the story of our family getaway to the mountain cabin. "It was terrifying, really," William said, gesturing with his fork. "We heard this terrible crash in the middle of the night. Poor Lucas here must have gotten confused looking for the bathroom, missed the first step, and boom, down he went." His colleagues shook their heads in sympathy. "It happens so fast at that age," one woman murmured, not bothering to lower her voice. "My father started losing his balance right before the dementia set in." Dementia. That was the narrative William was building, step by step, brick by brick. He was constructing a prison of incompetence around me. If I was senile, if I was frail, then anything I said about him would be dismissed as the ramblings of a confused old man. I took a sip of water. My hand did not shake. I made sure of that. I watched William carefully. He was handsome in that generic polished way, but I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. He was nervous. He should be. When he stood up for that toast, I knew he was trying to seal the deal. He was trying to publicly cement the story of my accident before I could challenge it. He wanted to shame me into silence. A toast to Lucas, he had said. That was the moment the fuse lit. I didn't plan to do it then. I had planned to wait to gather more legal documents to speak to my lawyer Blackwood, but looking at his face, seeing the disrespect, feeling the throb of the injury he gave me, I couldn't wait. When I lifted my shirt, the gasp from the room was collective. The bruise wrapped around my ribs was ugly, but the handprint was damning. It was the imprint of 4 fingers and a thumb pressed hard into the flesh. It was the mark of force. William froze. His eyes locked onto that mark. He knew that handprint. He knew it because it was his. For 5 seconds, nobody moved. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Then William slammed his glass down. The sound broke the trance. "All right, everyone, let's move to the living room for coffee," he announced loudly, his voice cracking slightly. "Dad is obviously not feeling well. He's confused. He needs his medication." He rushed around the table, grabbing my arm. His grip was tight, digging into the exact spot where the bruising was worst. He wasn't helping me up. He was hurting me. He was warning me. "Come on, Lucas," he hissed through a fake smile. "Let's get you to the kitchen." "You're making a scene." I allowed him to pull me up. I needed to get him alone. I needed him to admit it. Jasmine stood up, her napkin falling to the floor. "Dad, William, what is going on?" "Stay there, honey," William commanded, not looking at her. "Your father is having an episode. I need to calm him down." "Sorry, everyone. Please enjoy the dessert." He dragged me through the swinging doors into the kitchen. As soon as the doors swung shut, masking the chatter of the guests, the mask dropped completely. He shoved me against the granite island. The impact jarred my ribs and I saw white spots dance in my vision. I gasped, clutching my side. "Are you insane?" William snarled, his face inches from mine. His spit landed on my cheek. "What the hell do you think you are doing out there, showing off your old man skin to my investors?" I straightened up, taking a shallow breath. I looked him dead in the eye. I didn't see a successful financier. I saw a desperate man. "I wasn't showing off my skin, William. I was showing off your work. You always liked to take credit for your projects, didn't you?" William laughed, a harsh, barking sound. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the small space between the island and the industrial stove. "Nobody cares about your bruises, Lucas. You fell. You're old. You're clumsy. That is the story. That is the only story." "Is that why the police report is missing?" I asked quietly. "Is that why you didn't call the ambulance until 2 hours after I fell?" William stopped pacing. He turned to me, his eyes narrowing into slits. "There is no police report because it was an accident, and we waited because we didn't want to panic anyone. I saved your life, you ungrateful old leech. I drove you to the emergency room. I paid for your treatment." "You paid with my credit card," I corrected him. "I saw the alert on my phone before you smashed it." William stepped closer, invading my personal space. He lowered his voice to a menacing whisper. "Listen to me very carefully, Lucas. You are living in my house. You are eating my food. You are breathing my air. If you ever pull a stunt like that again, if you ever try to embarrass me in front of my clients, things are going to change. Change how I asked. Are you going to push me down a higher flight of stairs next time?" William's face twisted. He grabbed the collar of my shirt. "I am going to cut off your pain medication. I am going to tell Dr. Stevens that your dementia is progressing rapidly. I'll have you declared incompetent by Monday morning. Do you know what happens then?" I stared at him, unflinching. "Then I put you in Sunny Meadows." William said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "You know the place, the state-run facility downtown, the one that smells like urine and bleach. That is where you end up. Alone, forgotten, with no one to listen to your crazy stories about handprints and pushes." He released my collar with a shove. "You have 2 choices, Lucas. You go back out there, you apologize to my guests, you tell them you bumped into a door, and you act like the grateful, confused old man you are supposed to be. Or you spend the rest of your short life rotting in a bed with bed sores." My heart hammered against my ribs, but it wasn't fear. It was adrenaline. It was the cold, hard realization that my son-in-law wasn't just a bad husband, he was a monster, and he had made a fatal calculation error. He thought I was just an old man. He forgot that before I was old, I was an engineer. I built foundations, I understood structural integrity, and I knew exactly how to dismantle a weak structure. I reached into my pocket. William flinched, thinking I was pulling out a weapon. I pulled out a small black rectangle. It wasn't the phone he had destroyed. It was a digital voice recorder, the kind I used to use for site inspections. "You think I'm senile, William?" I said softly. You think I don't know the difference between a loose carpet and a sawed-off stair nosing? William froze, his eyes fixed on the device in my hand. What is that? He asked, his voice losing its edge. I pressed the play button. The audio was crisp and clear. It played the sound of footsteps on wood, the heavy breathing of a man, and then the distinct, rhythmic rasping of a handsaw cutting through timber. Click. Keep going. Just a little more, William's voice whispered on the recording. That should do it. One step and snap. I stopped the playback. I recorded this at 2:00 a.m. the night before the accident, I said. I heard you moving around. I knew you were up to something. I just didn't think you were stupid enough to try to kill me over an insurance policy. William's face went from pale to a deep blotchy red. He lunged at me. Give me that, he screamed. He wasn't smooth anymore. He wasn't the corporate shark. He was a cornered animal. He slammed into me, knocking the wind out of my damaged lungs. I cried out as we hit the counter. The recorder flew from my hand, skittering across the floor. William scrambled for it. He grabbed it, his hands shaking. He looked at me with pure hatred. You think this proves anything, he yelled. He turned to the sink, turned on the tap, and dropped the recorder into the running water. He watched it sink, watched the little red light flicker and die. He turned back to me, laughing breathlessly. Now it's just your word against mine, Lucas. And who are they going to believe, the successful investment banker or the old black man who thinks the stairs are out to get him? I leaned against the counter, clutching my side, watching him destroy the device. I didn't stop him. I didn't try to fight him. Because William didn't know the first rule of engineering: always have a backup. At that moment, the kitchen door swung open. Jasmine stood there, her eyes wide, tears streaming down her face. She looked from her husband, panting and wet-handed, at the sink, to me, crumpled against the cabinets. Dad, she whispered. William. What did I just hear? William spun around, his face instantly transforming into a mask of concern. Jasmine. Thank God. Your father, he's having a breakdown. He's paranoid. He brought this toy in here and started screaming about recordings and saws. I tried to calm him down, but he fell against the counter. He walked toward her, arms outstretched. It's the dementia, baby. It's getting worse. We have to do something. We can't keep him here. It's not safe for him, or for us. Jasmine looked at him. Then she looked at me. I saw the conflict in her eyes. She loved me, but she had been living under his roof, under his influence, for 10 years. She was financially dependent on him. She was emotionally tethered to him. I didn't say a word. I just watched her. This was the moment. Would she see the truth? Or would she retreat into the comfortable lie he was offering? Jasmine looked down at the floor. Dad, she said, her voice trembling. Maybe William is right. Maybe you need professional help. You've been acting so strange since the accident. My heart didn't break. It hardened. It turned into cold, solid concrete. William smirked over her shoulder. He had won this round, or so he thought. Fine, William said, taking charge. Tonight he stays in the guest room in the basement. I'm locking the door so he doesn't wander. Tomorrow morning I'm calling Sunny Meadows. We are doing this my way. He walked over to me, grabbed my arm again, and began to drag me toward the basement door. Say goodnight to your daughter, Lucas, he whispered in my ear. It's the last time you'll see her as a free man. I let him drag me. I let him shove me into the small windowless room he called a guest suite. I heard the heavy click of the lock turning from the outside. I was trapped. I was injured. I had no phone. My recorder was destroyed, and my own daughter thought I was losing my mind. But as I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, listening to William's footsteps retreating upstairs to his party, I didn't feel despair. I reached into my sock and pulled out the SD card I had removed from the recorder 5 minutes before I walked into the kitchen. William had drowned an empty shell. The evidence was dry and warm in my hand. He wanted to send me to Sunny Meadows. Fine, I would go. But I wouldn't be going as a patient. I would be going as an investigator. Because there was something William didn't know about me. Something nobody knew. I wasn't just a retired engineer living on a pension. I was the silent partner in the largest infrastructure firm in the state, and I had resources William Vanderwood couldn't even dream of. The old man had learned his lesson all right. The lesson was never leave an enemy standing. I stood up and looked at the basement window high on the wall. It was small, painted shut, and reinforced. To anyone else it was a wall. To a structural engineer, it was just a problem waiting for a solution, and I had all night to solve it. William watched the bubbles rise from my phone as it sank to the bottom of the stainless steel sink. He turned the faucet handle, shutting off the water with a violent jerk. His chest heaved with the exertion of our struggle, but a twisted grin spread across his face. "There goes your leverage, Lucas," he sneered, wiping his wet hands on a dish towel. He laughed, a sound that bounced off the cold granite countertops. It was the laugh of a man who believed he had just erased his crimes. He leaned back against the counter, crossing his arms, looking at me with pure condescension. "You really are pathetic, old man. Did you honestly think a blurry photo of a bruise and some senile ramblings would stand up against me? I am a pillar of this community. You are just a confused retiree living in my basement." I stood there clutching my side where my cracked ribs screamed in protest. The pain was blinding, white-hot spikes driving into my chest with every shallow breath. But I did not let it show on my face. I have built bridges that withstand hurricanes. I have designed foundations that hold up skyscrapers during earthquakes. I know how to absorb shock. I reached into the front pocket of my trousers. William flinched, his eyes widening for a fraction of a second. He expected a weapon. He expected violence. Instead, I pulled out a small silver device. It was no larger than a pack of gum. A professional-grade micro-recorder, the kind structural engineers use to dictate notes in the middle of a noisy construction site. It was rugged, it was reliable, and it was waterproof. I did not say a word. I simply held it up. William stared at it, confusion clouding his arrogance. I pressed the play button. The audio that filled the kitchen was crystal clear. It cut through the hum of the refrigerator. It was the sound of silence. At first, the ambient noise of the mountain cabin at night, then footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps on wooden floorboards. Then a voice. William's voice. Just a little more, the recording whispered. One clean cut and gravity does the rest. Then came the sound, the rhythmic grating rasp of a handsaw biting into timber. It was the sound of metal eating through wood, the sound of a trap being set. I watched the color drain from William's face. He looked like he had seen a ghost. The arrogant smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure terror. "You drowned a decoy, William," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I knew you would go for the phone. You are predictable. You act on impulse. I act on calculation." William lunged at me. This time there was no hesitation. He was desperate. He slammed into me, driving his shoulder into my injured chest. I cried out as the air left my lungs. We crashed to the floor. The recorder skittered across the tiles, sliding under the gap of the refrigerator. William was on top of me, his hands grasping for my throat. His eyes were wild. "Where's the copy?" he screamed, spit flying onto my face. "Who did you send it to?" I wheezed, trying to push him off, but my strength was failing. The pain was overwhelming. Just then the kitchen door burst open. The sound of high heels clicking rapidly on the tile floor echoed through the room. Jasmine rushed in, her eyes wide with panic. She froze at the sight of us, her husband red-faced and panting, straddling her 70-year-old father on the kitchen floor. "Hunter. Dad." "What are you doing?" she shrieked. William scrambled off me instantly. He stood up, smoothing his shirt, transforming in the blink of an eye. He held his hands up in a gesture of surrender, backing away from me as if I were a rabid animal. "Jasmine, thank God you are here." William gasped, feigning breathless fear. He tried to attack me. He is having a psychotic break. He started raving about saws and murder, and then he just lunged at me. I had to restrain him. I struggled to sit up, clutching the counter for support. My vision swam. "Jasmine," I wheezed. "Listen to me. He is lying." Jasmine looked at me, then at William. She was trembling. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. She looked like a lost child. "Dad." "Please," she sobbed. "Please stop this. You are scaring me. Why are you doing this?" I looked at my daughter, my beautiful, brilliant Jasmine. I remembered the day she was born. I held her in my arms and promised I would protect her from everything. I promised she would never know hardship. I gave her everything she ever wanted. I shielded her from every failure, every heartbreak, every harsh reality of the world. And that was my mistake. I had engineered her life to be frictionless. I had built her a world with no sharp edges. And in doing so, I had failed to build her character. I had created a woman who crumbled under pressure, a woman who chose the comfortable lie over the difficult truth. She was weak because I had never let her be strong. Jasmine, look at him, I said, pointing a shaking finger at William. He tried to kill me at the cabin. I have proof. Stop it! Jasmine screamed, covering her ears. Stop saying that Hunter loves you. We take care of you. Why do you hate us so much? William stepped forward, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. He pulled her close, whispering into her hair, casting a look of triumphant pity in my direction. It is the dementia, honey, he said softly. Dr. Stevens warned us this might happen. Paranoia, aggression. He doesn't know what he is saying. It is not his fault. But we can't let him hurt us. He looked at me over her shoulder. His eyes were cold, dead things. Dad needs professional care, William said. Immediate care. William guided Jasmine to a chair and sat her down. He kissed her forehead, then turned back to me. His demeanor hardened. He walked over to the refrigerator, knelt down, and fished the micro-recorder out from underneath. He stood up, weighing it in his hand. He didn't destroy it this time. He slipped it into his pocket. Here is the situation, Lucas, he said, his voice low and dangerous. He pulled a folded document from his inside jacket pocket. He slammed it onto the counter next to me. This is a power of attorney. It gives me full control over your finances, your medical decisions, and your estate. You are going to sign it. Tonight. I looked at the papers. The text blurred before my eyes. And if I don't? I asked. William leaned in close. Then I call the police right now. I tell them you attacked me. I show them the bruises on my arms from where you grabbed me. I tell them you threatened Jasmine. With your history of confusion lately and my standing in the community, who do you think they will believe? You will be committed to the state psychiatric ward? Involuntarily. He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. Or he continued, his voice silky smooth. You sign this paper. You admit you are confused. And tomorrow morning we drive you to Sunny Meadows. It is a nice facility. They specialize in difficult cases like yours. You will be comfortable there. You will be safe. And most importantly, you won't be a danger to my family anymore. I looked at Jasmine. She was sobbing into her hands, refusing to look at me. She had made her choice. She chose the illusion of safety over the father who had raised her. I realized then that I had no allies in this house. I was alone. I looked at the recorder in William's pocket. He thought he had the only copy. He thought he had won. Fine, I whispered. I let my shoulders slump. I let the defeat wash over my face. I needed him to believe I was broken. I will sign, I said. Just don't call the police. I don't want Jasmine to see that. William smiled. It was the smile of a predator who has just brought down its prey. Good choice, Lucas. He handed me a pen. I signed the document. My hand shook, not from age, but from rage. I signed a name, but I made sure it was illegible. It didn't matter. The document was a stalling tactic. William snatched the paper away as soon as the pen left the page. He inspected it, satisfied. Smart man, he said. He grabbed my arm again. Now let's get you settled. You can't stay in your room tonight. Too many sharp objects. For your own safety, you will sleep in the basement storage room. He dragged me to the door. I did not fight. I let him lead me down the narrow wooden stairs into the damp, cold darkness of the basement. The smell of mildew and old concrete filled my nose. There was a small cot in the corner, a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. It was a cell. William shoved me inside. I stumbled, falling onto the hard mattress. My ribs screamed in agony. Sleep tight, Lucas, he said from the doorway. We will leave for Sunny Meadows at dawn. He slammed the heavy wooden door shut. I heard the slide of the deadbolt. Then I heard the sound of a key turning in the lock. I was trapped, buried alive in my own home. I lay there in the dark, listening to his footsteps fade away. The pain in my side was excruciating. My heart ached for my daughter. But my mind was clear. William had made a critical error. He was a finance guy. He dealt in numbers and abstract concepts. He didn't understand the physical world. He didn't understand how things were built. He thought he had taken my evidence. He thought the recorder in his pocket was the end of the story. I reached down to my ankle. I rolled down my sock. Taped against my skin, warm and safe, was a small black square. The SD card. I had removed it from the recorder the moment I heard Jasmine coming down the hall, seconds before William tackled me. He had the machine. I had the memory. I sat up wincing. I looked around the room. The basement was unfinished. The walls were cinder block. High up near the ceiling was a small hopper window. It was painted shut and covered with a security grate. To a banker, that window was a wall. To a structural engineer, it was a series of stress points and leverage opportunities. William thought the game was over. He thought he had buried the old man. But he forgot one thing: seeds grow in the dark. I stood up, ignoring the pain. I walked to the corner of the room where my old tool bench used to be. It was empty now, stripped of anything useful. But in the shadows behind a stack of old paint cans, I saw a glint of metal. It was a small rusted putty knife. I picked it up. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I looked at the window. I looked at the hinges. "I have 8 hours until dawn," I whispered to the darkness. "That is plenty of time to dismantle a house of cards." I looked up at the hopper window, which was a small rectangle of freedom located 7 feet above the concrete floor. William saw a painted shut obstacle protected by a security grate, but I saw a challenge in tension and sheer force. I dragged a wooden crate over to the wall, and every inch I moved, it sent a fresh wave of fire through my cracked ribs, but I gritted my teeth and climbed up. The pain was blinding white noise, yet I pushed it to the back of my mind. I have spent 40 years analyzing stress fractures in steel girders and calculating load distributions for suspension bridges, and I remember the winter of 1982 when we were pouring concrete for the interstate overpass. The temperature dropped unexpectedly and most men would have packed up, but I stayed because I checked every rebar tie and measured the curing temperature every hour. My foreman called me obsessive, but I called it necessary because when you build things that people trust with their lives, you do not cut corners and you do not leave weaknesses. William was a man of shortcuts, which was his weakness because he had painted over the window latch thinking the layers of latex were as good as a weld. He was wrong, so I took the rusted putty knife and began to work the edge. I didn't hack at it. Instead, I applied steady, calculated pressure to the seam where the frame met the sash. The scraping sound was maddeningly slow as sweat dripped into my eyes and my side throbbed in time with my heartbeat. I focused on the hinges, which were standard steel butt hinges, rusted but intact, while the pins were painted over. I used the corner of the knife to chip away the paint around the pin head, and it took an hour while my arms screamed and my lungs burned, but finally I exposed the metal. I wedged the knife blade under the head of the top pin and tapped the handle with the heel of my hand, and it made a clinking sound but didn't move. I hit it again harder this time, ignoring the jolt of pain that ran down my spine, and with another clink the pin rose a fraction of an inch. I worked it up millimeter by agonizing millimeter until I could pull it free with my fingers, and then I repeated the process on the bottom hinge. When the second pin fell into my hand, the window was no longer a part of the wall. It was just a piece of glass held in place by gravity and habit. I pushed, and the paint seal cracked with a loud pop as the window swung inward, allowing the cold night air to rush in, smelling of snow and freedom. It was the sweetest thing I had ever smelled as I squeezed through the opening with my ribs scraping against the rough concrete sill and fell into the snowbank outside, where I lay for a moment gasping and looking up at the stars. I was out, but the night was just beginning. I limped to the main road where the wind cut through my thin sweater, but the cold was good because it numbed the pain and kept me sharp. I flagged down a passing taxi, and the driver looked at my disheveled appearance and the dirt on my clothes, but the roll of cash I pulled from my sock spoke a language he understood. So I told him to take me to 149 Elm Street, which was the address William had taunted me with Sunny Meadows. When the taxi pulled up, my stomach turned, because the name conjured images of green fields and light, but the reality was a brick block that looked more like a prison than a home. The sign was faded and peeling, while a single security light flickered over the entrance, illuminating an overflowing dumpster. I paid the driver and told him to wait. Then I walked up to the fence, and the smell hit me first, which was the stench of neglect mixed with urine-boiled cabbage and industrial bleach trying to cover the scent of decay. Through a ground-floor window, I saw a room crowded with beds where there were no personal items and no pictures on the walls, just elderly figures looking like lumps under thin gray blankets staring at a television that was turned off. A nurse sat at a station scrolling on her phone and ignoring a call light that blinked insistently down the hall. This was William's plan for me because he didn't want me cared for. He wanted me stored so I would rot in this warehouse of forgotten souls while he spent the money I had earned. He wanted to erase 20 years of my life, my dignity, and my legacy. I gripped the cold chain-link fence until my knuckles turned white, and the rage that filled me was colder than the winter wind, because it was a focused, diamond-hard fury. I thought of my late wife Beatrice and the promise I made to her on her deathbed that I would protect our family and never let them fall into the poverty we fought so hard to escape. I had failed because I had let a wolf into the fold and let him feast on my kindness, but looking at this hellhole, I knew one thing for certain, that the time for kindness was over. I turned back to the waiting taxi and told him to take me to a payphone and then find me a good hotel. The phone booth was freezing, and the metal handset bit into my ear as I dialed a number I hadn't used in 5 years, which rang twice before a deep voice answered. It was Blackwood, and although it was 3 in the morning, he sounded as awake as if it were noon. I told him it was Lucas, and there was a pause on the other end, followed by a heavy, significant silence before he said he hadn't heard that tone in a long time and asked if I was all right. I looked at my reflection in the glass of the booth and saw that I looked old and battered, but my eyes were clear, so I told him I was done playing the retiree because William tried to kill me and then tried to bury me in a state facility. I heard the sound of a chair shifting and papers rustling as Blackwood moved and asked what I needed. I took a deep breath as the cold air filled my lungs, fueling the fire inside me, and told him to initiate the Omega Protocol. This was the nuclear option, which was the failsafe I had set up years ago when I first sensed William's greed. It was a series of legal and financial maneuvers designed to liquidate assets, freeze accounts, and expose liabilities, acting as a weapon of mass financial destruction. Blackwood repeated the word Omega and asked if I was sure, because there would be no going back from this, as it would strip him of everything. I looked at the bruises on my arm and thought of the sawed-off stare and the empty eyes of the patients at Sunny Meadows. Then I told him I was sure, because he wanted to take my life, so I was going to take his lifestyle. I told him I wanted him to buy William's debt, every cent of it, including the house, the cars, and the credit cards, because I wanted to own him by sunrise. Blackwood said to consider it done and asked where I was so he could send a car and a suit. I gave him my location, and before hanging up, Blackwood welcomed me back. I hung up the phone knowing the die was cast and the engineer was gone, while the architect of William's downfall had just clocked in. I stepped out into the night, no longer a victim, but a predator who knew exactly where to strike. The sun rose over the snow-covered lawn of the estate, my money bought, but my name was not on. Inside, William was likely pouring his artisanal coffee, expecting to find a broken old man in the basement ready for transport to the hellhole on Elm Street. Instead, he found an empty room and a broken window. I can picture the smile falling from his face, not because he was worried about my safety, but because he was worried about his liability. He did not call the hospitals, and he did not call the morgue. He called the police non-emergency line. I know this because Blackwood was already monitoring the dispatch channels. Officer, my father-in-law has wandered off. William told them, his voice dripping with fake concern. He is 70 years old, suffering from advanced dementia, and he can become aggressive when confused. He painted the picture of a lost, senile danger to himself and others. He wanted the police to find a body or a madman. He never expected them to find nothing. As he hung up the phone, he probably looked out at the freezing temperatures and smirked, thinking nature had done his dirty work for him. He thought I was freezing in a ditch somewhere, ending his problem permanently. He poured his coffee and toasted to his good fortune, believing he was finally free of the only man who saw through him. He had no idea that while he was playing the grieving son-in-law, I was sitting in a plush leather chair 10 miles away, watching the city wake up from the penthouse suite of the Four Seasons. He thought I was dead, but I was just getting dressed for his funeral. A knock on the heavy oak door interrupted my thoughts, and it was Blackwood. He did not look like a lawyer. He looked like a shadow in a trench coat holding a garment bag like a weapon case. He did not say a word. He just hung the bag on the closet door and placed a small velvet box on the table. Inside was my Patek Philippe, the one I bought when I sold my first patent 30 years ago, the one William thought I had lost. I stripped off the dirty, torn clothes I had worn for a week, the uniform of the victim. I showered, scrubbing the smell of the basement and the fear off my skin. The hot water stung my ribs, but it woke up my muscles. When I stepped out, I was not just a 70-year-old man anymore. I put on the charcoal gray Italian wool suit Blackwood had brought, which was tailored to perfection, hiding the bandages wrapped around my torso. I fastened the watch, and the weight of the gold on my wrist was grounding. I looked in the mirror, and Lucas, the frail retiree, was gone. Mr. Carter, the silent titan of industry, stared back. We took the town car to the National Bank headquarters downtown. The lobby was crowded with people waiting in lines, hoping for loans, begging for extensions. I walked past them all. The security guard stepped forward to stop me, his hand raising, but then he saw the suit, he saw the watch, and most importantly, he saw the way I walked. I did not walk like I was asking for permission. I walked like I owned the building. He stepped back and held the rope open. I did not go to a teller. Instead, I went straight to the brushed steel elevator at the back, the one with no buttons on the outside, just a card reader. I did not have a card and I did not need one. I stood there and looked up at the security camera, and 5 seconds later the doors slid open. We rode up to the top floor in silence. When the doors opened, Harrison Sterling, the bank director, was waiting for us. This was a man who made mayors wait for appointments, yet he stood there wringing his hands, looking nervous. "Mr. Carter," he said, bowing his head slightly. "It has been too long. We did not expect you." I walked past him into his corner office, the one with the view that cost more than William's soul. I sat in his leather chair before he could offer it. "I did not come for pleasantries, Harrison." I said, my voice low and hard. "I came to make a withdrawal." Sterling looked confused, but he sat down and opened his laptop, asking how he could help. I slid a piece of paper across the mahogany desk, which had one name on it: William Vanderwood. "Pull up his file," I ordered. Sterling typed the name and frowned, saying, "Sir, this is a personal banking matter. We usually handle this downstairs." I stared at him until he stopped talking and kept typing. His eyes widened as he read the screen. I knew what he was seeing because I had seen the preliminary reports, but seeing the official bank records was vindication. It was a disaster. High-risk loans taken out against the house, maxed-out credit lines, massive transfers to offshore crypto exchanges that had collapsed months ago, and the gambling debts disguised as cash advances. William was not just broke, he was drowning. He had leveraged everything, including my daughter's future, on a series of bets he had lost. "This account is in default," Sterling said quietly. "He is 90 days past due on the mortgage, and the secondary loans are in collections. He is technically insolvent." I leaned forward, ignoring the sharp pain in my ribs. "I want to buy it," I said. Sterling blinked and asked pardon. "I want to buy his debt." I repeated all of it: the mortgage on the house on Oak Creek, the car loans, the personal lines of credit. I want to become the sole creditor for every cent William Vanderwood owes. Sterling hesitated, saying, "Mr. Carter, that is highly irregular. Usually we would just foreclose and auction the assets. You would lose money buying this paper. It is toxic." "I do not care about the money, Harrison," I said, my voice cold enough to freeze the coffee in his cup. "I am not buying this for the return on investment. I am buying it for the leverage. I do not want the interest payments. I do not want to restructure. I want the right to immediate foreclosure. I want the power to evict. I want the power to strip him naked and leave him standing in the snow." Sterling looked at me. Then he looked at Blackwood, who simply nodded. He saw the resolve in my eyes. He saw that this was not business. It was an execution. "Very well, Mr. Carter," Sterling said, reaching for his phone. "I will have legal draw up the transfer documents immediately. It will take an hour." I checked my watch. "You have 45 minutes. I said I have a house to repossess before lunch." The town car dropped me off 2 blocks from the house. I stripped off the Italian wool suit in the back seat, folding it carefully into the garment bag Blackwood would retrieve later. I pulled on the dirty, torn sweater and the stained trousers I had worn in the basement. I rubbed a little dirt from the floor mat onto my face and messed up my hair. I looked in the rearview mirror, and Lucas, the titan of industry, vanished. In his place was a confused, broken old man who had spent the night shivering in the cold. I thanked the driver and stepped out onto the icy pavement. I walked the last quarter mile with a shuffle, letting my shoulders slump, letting my head hang low. When I turned the corner onto the driveway, the flashing red and blue lights of a police cruiser cut through the gray morning light. William was standing on the porch, wrapped in a cashmere coat, talking to a young officer. He looked the picture of the concerned son-in-law, his face etched with performative worry. As soon as he saw me trudging up the path, his eyes lit up, not with relief, but with the thrill of a narrative falling into place. He rushed down the steps, slipping slightly on the ice, adding to the drama. "Dad," he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "Thank God. Where have you been? We have been sick with worry." He grabbed me in a hug that looked affectionate to the officer but felt like a vice. His fingers dug into my bruised ribs, a subtle reminder of who was in charge. I let out a whimper, leaning into him as if I could barely stand. I don't know," I mumbled, making my voice tremble. "I just wanted to go for a walk. It was so dark. I couldn't find the door." The police officer approached his notebook out. He looked at me with that soft, condescending pity people reserve for children and the infirm. "Is this him, sir?" the officer asked William. "Yes, this is Lucas," William said, supporting my weight while simultaneously pinching my arm. "He has been having these episodes more frequently since the accident. He gets confused. He wanders. I am so sorry we wasted your time, officer. We try to keep the doors locked, but he is tricky." "It is no trouble, Mr. Vanderwood," the officer said, holstering his pen. "It is just good that he is home safe. It is too cold for anyone to be out there, especially in his condition. You might want to consider better locks or maybe a monitoring system. We are looking into a facility," William said, his voice dropping to a somber whisper. "Sunny Meadows. We think he needs 24-hour care. It is a hard decision, but days like this, well, they make it clear we can't handle him on our own anymore." The officer nodded sympathetically. "It is a heavy burden, sir. You are doing a good thing. Good luck." I watched the officer get back into his car. I wanted to scream. I wanted to straighten my back and tell him that this man was a liar and a thief, but I knew it wouldn't work. The script was already written. The officer saw a wealthy white man in a cashmere coat and a ragged black man who didn't know where he was. The bias was the foundation, and William had built a fortress on top of it. I stayed silent. I let the cruiser pull away. As the taillights disappeared around the bend, the air changed. The warmth left William's body. He didn't let go of me, but the embrace turned into a capture. He dragged me up the stairs and shoved me through the front door. The house was warm, smelling of cinnamon and coffee, a stark contrast to the cold calculation in William's eyes. He slammed the door shut and locked it. He pushed me against the wall. There was no audience now, no need for the concerned act. "You stupid old fool," he hissed, his face inches from mine. "Did you think you could run? Did you think you could just walk away from me?" I slumped against the wall, clutching my chest. I stared at the floor, refusing to meet his eyes. I needed him to think I was broken. I needed him to think he had won. "I just wanted to leave," I whispered. "Please, just let me go." William laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Let you go, and let you blab to anyone who will listen. No, Lucas, you aren't going anywhere until I say so. And right now I say you are going to sign those papers." He dragged me into his study. It was a room I had paid for, filled with leather-bound books he had never read. He shoved me into a chair in front of his massive oak desk. He pulled the power of attorney document out of a drawer. It was the same one from the night before, smoothed out, waiting for my surrender. "Sign it," he commanded, sliding a heavy fountain pen across the polished wood. I looked at the paper. I looked at my hands. They were shaking, partly from the cold, partly from the rage vibrating in my marrow. I can't," I stammered. "Jasmine. She needs to know." William walked around the desk. He leaned down, placing his hands on the armrests of my chair, trapping me. His cologne was overpowering, a musk that tried too hard to be masculine. "Jasmine doesn't need to know anything," he said softly. "She is already done with you, Lucas. She thinks you are crazy. She cried herself to sleep last night because she thinks her father is gone. And do you know who comforted her? Me. I am the only family she has left." He paused, letting the isolation sink in. Then he played his ace. "And then there is Leo." My head snapped up. Leo was my grandson. He was 7 years old. He was the only pure thing in this entire wretched house. He loved building blocks and asking me how skyscrapers didn't fall down. He was the future. "What about Leo?" I asked, my voice hardening for a fraction of a second before I caught myself. William smiled. He saw he had hit a nerve. "You know, boarding schools are very strict these days," he mused, straightening up and examining his fingernails. "There is one upstate, military style. They take discipline very seriously. They break the defiant ones. I have been thinking Leo needs a firmer hand. He is too soft, too much like his grandfather." He looked down at me, his eyes gleaming with malice. "If you don't sign this paper, Lucas, if you continue to be a problem, I will send him away. I will send him to a place where he will be miserable every single day until he is 18. And Jasmine won't stop me. She does whatever I say. You know that." This was the point of no return. This was the moment the bridge collapsed. Threatening me was one thing. Threatening my money was another. but threatening Leo William had just declared war on a nuclear power. I felt a cold clarity wash over me. The pain in my ribs faded into the background. The fear evaporated. There was only calculation left. I looked at William. I let a single tear roll down my cheek. It was the best acting of my life. "No," I whispered. "Not Leo. Please, don't send him away." "Then sign," William said, tapping the paper. "Sign, and I will let him stay. I will let you rot in Sunny Meadows, but Leo will stay here with his mother." He thought he was negotiating. He didn't realize he was standing in the kill zone. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a handkerchief to wipe my eyes. Concealed within the folds of the cloth was the sleek black smartphone Blackwood had given me. It was already unlocked. The banking app was open. The foreclosure authorization was on the screen. A single button. Execute. I put the handkerchief down on the desk, keeping the phone hidden beneath it. I picked up the pen with my right hand. "I promise," I said, my voice shaking. "I will do whatever you want. Just leave the boy alone." "Good," William said. "Do it." I lowered the pen to the paper. I started to sign. I made the letters shaky, jagged, the signature of a man losing control of his faculties. L-U-C-A-S. As I wrote the last letter, my left hand rested on the handkerchief. My thumb found the screen through the fabric. I felt the haptic feedback of the button press. Click. The signal went out. It traveled from this room through the cell towers to the bank's servers downtown. It authorized the immediate purchase of the debt. It triggered the foreclosure clause. It initiated the asset freeze. In the span of a heartbeat, William Vanderwood went from being a millionaire to a trespasser in his own home. I finished the signature. I dropped the pen. I pushed the paper toward him. "There," I said, exhaling a breath I felt I had been holding for years. "It is done." William snatched the paper up. He checked the signature. A wide, victorious grin spread across his face. He laughed, a sound of pure relief and triumph. He held the paper up like a trophy. Finally, he crowed. "You finally did something useful, old man." He turned away from me, walking toward the window to admire the view of the snow-covered estate he thought he still owned. "You made the right choice, Lucas," he said, his back to me. "Sunny Meadows isn't so bad. I hear the pudding is excellent on Tuesdays." He didn't see me slide the phone back into my pocket. He didn't see the cold smile that touched my lips. He didn't know that the house he was standing in was no longer his. He didn't know that the car in the driveway was about to be repossessed. He didn't know that his credit cards were turning into plastic scrap at this very moment. He stood there gloating, king of a kingdom that had just evaporated. "Enjoy the view," William thought. "It is the last time you will see it from this side of the glass." I sat back in the chair, the pain in my ribs a dull throb now. I waited. The clock on the wall ticked. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Then the lights flickered. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen died. The smart home panel on the wall went dark. William turned around, frowning. "What the hell?" he muttered. He pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen. He frowned deeper. "No signal," he said, "and the power is out." He looked at me. I sat there in the dim light of the winter morning, my hands folded in my lap. "Must be the storm," he said, dismissing me. He walked toward the door. "I'm going to check the breaker. You stay here. Don't move." He walked out. I heard his footsteps heading for the basement. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The demolition had already begun. The charges were set. The fuse was burned. Now all I had to do was watch the structure fall. The power cut was immediate and absolute. The hum of the refrigerator died. The ambient lights of the smart home system vanished, and the comforting whir of the furnace spun down into silence. The house, usually a fortress against the winter, was suddenly just a box of cold air. William stood in the center of the living room, illuminated only by the pale moonlight reflecting off the snow outside. He was tapping furiously on his phone, his face a mask of confusion that was rapidly souring into rage. "This is ridiculous," he spat, shoving the phone into his pocket. He strode over to the wall-mounted landline, the one they kept for emergencies. He snatched the receiver and dialed. I watched him from the shadows of the dining room. I had already taken a seat at the head of the table, his seat. I struck a match, the sudden flare of sulfur and flame cutting through the gloom. I lit a single tall taper candle. "Hello." "Yes, this is William Vanderwood," he barked into the phone. "My power is out, my water is off. What is going on?" He paused, listening. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the phone. "What do you mean, Requested. I didn't request anything. I am the owner of this house. He listened again. His face went from red to a sickly shade of gray. New owner. What new owner? That is impossible. I demand to speak to a supervisor. He slammed the phone down. He turned to the room, his chest heaving. They said the owner ordered the utilities cut. They said the account was transferred an hour ago. He looked at me then. I was calmly breaking a piece of dry bread I had saved from the kitchen pantry. I chewed slowly, the sound loud in the silent house. I looked at him over the flame of the candle. Comfort is a privilege, William. I said, my voice low and steady. Not a right. You seem to have forgotten that. William marched over to the table. He slammed his hands down on the wood, making the candle flicker. You, he hissed. You did this. I don't know how, but you did this. I took a sip of water from a plastic bottle I had brought from the basement. You built your castle on a swamp, son. You leveraged everything. You thought the debt would never come due. But the bill always comes, and tonight the collection plate is being passed. William's eyes bulged. He looked deranged in the flickering light. The facade of the civilized banker peeled away, revealing the desperate, violent man underneath. You think this is a game, he screamed. It is 10 degrees outside. My wife is freezing. My son is freezing. Then you should have paid your mortgage instead of your bookie, I replied calmly. You should have secured your family's future instead of trying to murder their grandfather for a payout, he snapped. He roared a guttural sound of pure fury and lunged across the table, his hand raised to strike me. I didn't flinch. I sat there, the candlelight reflecting in my eyes, watching him come. Hunter. Stop. Jasmine rushed into the room wrapped in a thick robe, her hair disheveled. She grabbed his arm, pulling him back. Don't touch him, she screamed. Have you lost your mind? William spun on her. He shoved her away with a violence that shocked even me. Get off me, he yelled. He is ruining us. Jasmine stumbled back, hitting the wall with a dull thud. She slid down to the floor, looking up at her husband with wide, terrified eyes. Before William could advance on me again, a sound cut through the tension. It was the loud, rhythmic beeping of a heavy vehicle reversing, then the grinding whine of hydraulics. William froze. He knew that sound. Everyone who lives on credit knows that sound. He ran to the window. Outside, bathed in the flashing amber lights of a tow truck, his prized Porsche was being lifted into the air. My car. He gasped. He bolted for the front door, throwing it open and running out into the snow in his socks. Hey, put that down. That is my car. I followed him to the doorway, Jasmine limping behind me. The repo man was a giant in a heavy coat. He didn't even look at William. He just kept securing the chains. William grabbed the man's arm. Stop. I command you to stop. The driver turned. He shoved a clipboard into William's chest. Order comes from the top, buddy, the driver grunted. Immediate liquidation. New creditor says take everything with wheels. William stood there shivering violently in the snow, holding the paper. He watched as his status symbol, his pride, was hauled away into the night. He turned back to the house. I stood in the doorway, the candlelight behind me casting a long shadow over him. Come inside, William, I called out. It is going to be a long, cold night. William stood in the freezing hallway of the house he no longer owned, frantically trying to smooth the deep creases in his navy suit jacket with the palm of his hand. Without electricity there was no iron, and without hot water there was no steam. The man who prided himself on his impeccable appearance looked like he had slept in a laundry hamper. His desperation was a palpable thing radiating off him like heat waves. He had to get to the Vanguard investment gala. It was his last hope. He needed to secure bridge capital from his partners before they found out his assets had been frozen. He needed to spin a story about a banking error or a temporary liquidity issue. He needed to lie, and he needed to look good doing it. He checked his reflection in the hallway mirror and grimaced. His eyes were bloodshot from stress and the cold. He pulled his collar up to hide the lack of starch in his shirt. He pulled out his phone to call a rideshare because his luxury SUV was currently sitting in an impound lot across town. The indignity of it nearly made him scream. He tapped the screen aggressively, muttering curses under his breath. When the car arrived, it was a dented compact sedan with a rattling muffler. William hesitated, looking around the neighborhood, hoping none of the neighbors were watching. He slid into the back seat, hiding his face. I watched from the top of the stairs as he fled. He was running into a burning building, but he was too arrogant to smell the smoke. He thought he could charm his way out of this. He thought his silver tongue would save him one last time. He did not know that the gala was not his salvation. It was his sentencing hearing. At the gala, the atmosphere was already tense. My sources told me William arrived looking frantic. He grabbed a glass of champagne a little too quickly. He cornered investors, his laugh too loud, his smile too wide. He was sweating despite the air conditioning. His colleagues whispered behind their hands. They noticed the wrinkled suit. They noticed the manic energy. Rumors were already circulating about his financial state because in the world of high finance, bad news travels faster than light. William was drowning in the middle of a ballroom and everyone was watching him struggle to keep his head above water. Back at the house, the silence was heavy after William left. Jasmine sat on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, holding my grandson Leo. She looked exhausted, broken by the sudden collapse of her life. She stared at the floor, her eyes hollow. She did not know what to believe anymore. She only knew that her husband was a desperate man, and her father was a mystery she was just beginning to unravel. I walked down the stairs. I was no longer wearing the rags of the confused old man. I was wearing a bespoke tuxedo, midnight blue with a silk lapel. My shoes were polished to a mirror shine. My posture was straight, my movements precise. I held a silver-headed cane not for support but for authority. Jasmine looked up and gasped. She blinked as if she were seeing a stranger. "Dad," she whispered, "where did you get those clothes? Who are you?" I walked over to her. I placed a hand on her shoulder. It was a gesture of comfort, but it was firm. "I am the man who is going to fix this, Jasmine," I said, my voice deep and steady. "I am the man who is going to make sure you and Leo never have to be afraid again." A pair of headlights swept across the living room window. A long black limousine pulled into the driveway. It was not a rental. It was my car. My driver Thomas stepped out and opened the rear door, waiting. "I have to go out for a while," I told her. "I need you to do exactly as I say. Lock the doors. Stay in this room. Keep Leo close. Do not open the door for anyone except my lawyer Blackwood. Do you understand?" Jasmine nodded slowly, her eyes wide. She was seeing the father she had never known, the man who had built bridges and commanded crews. She saw the steel beneath the skin. "Where are you going?" she asked. "I am going to finish what William started," I replied. I turned and walked out the door into the cold night. Thomas held the door open for me. I slid into the leather interior of the limousine. It smelled of cedar and leather. I checked my watch. The timing was perfect. William was about to make his speech. He was about to climb onto his pedestal one last time. The drive to the gala was smooth and silent. I watched the city lights pass by. I thought about the years I had spent playing the fool, letting William underestimate me, letting him think he was the provider. It was a long game, but the end game was here. The limousine pulled up to the Grand Hotel. The valet rushed to open the door. I stepped out. I adjusted my cuffs. Two large men in dark suits stepped out of the shadows. They were my personal security detail. They fell into step behind me. We walked through the lobby, the sound of my cane tapping a rhythmic warning on the marble floor. Inside the ballroom, William was on the stage. He had seized the microphone, his face shining with sweat and false confidence. He was pitching a new fund, promising returns that were mathematically impossible. "This is a golden opportunity," he shouted, his voice echoing through the hall. "We are building the future. We are untouchable." I signaled the doorman. He threw open the double doors. The sound of the doors crashing against the walls cut William off mid-sentence. The entire room turned. 300 heads swiveled toward the entrance. I stood there, framed by the doorway. I did not say a word. I just walked forward. My security detail flanked me, clearing a path through the crowd. The guests parted like the Red Sea. They sensed the power. They saw the man who did not need to shout to be heard. William froze on stage. He squinted into the lights. When he recognized me, his face contorted in a mixture of confusion and rage. He laughed a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Security!" he yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Security, get this man out of here. Who let this senile old beggar in? He is wandering again. Get him out." Nobody moved. The security guards stood by the walls looking at the floor. I continued walking until I reached the base of the stage. I looked up at him. He looked small up there, alone in the spotlight. The CEO of the company, a man named Preston, stepped out from the shadows of the stage wing. William turned to him, relief washing over his face. "Preston, tell them," William pleaded. "Tell them to throw my father-in-law out. He is sick. He is ruining the event." Preston ignored him. He walked to the edge of the stage. He looked down at me. Then he did something that made the entire room gasp. He bowed. It was a deep, respectful bow. "Welcome, Chairman Carter," Preston said, his voice amplified by the microphone William was still clutching. "We have been waiting for you. The board is ready for your announcement." William dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a deafening screech. He looked from Preston to me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The old man he had tried to bury was the man who owned the ground he was standing on. The silence that followed Preston's declaration was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air right out of the ballroom. 300 of the city's most elite movers and shakers stood frozen, their champagne flutes halfway to their lips, staring at the stage. The only sound was the high-pitched feedback whine from the microphone that William had dropped. It lay on the floorboards, screeching like a dying animal. William stood paralyzed. His brain was misfiring. I could see the gears grinding behind his eyes, trying to reconcile two impossible realities. In his mind, I was the senile, broken old man he had locked in a basement without heat. In front of him, I was the chairman of the board, the silent architect of the very firm that employed him. The cognitive dissonance was so strong he looked like he might have a stroke right there on stage. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out, just a dry rasp of disbelief. I stepped onto the stairs leading up to the stage. I did not need the cane for support, but I used it for rhythm. Tap, step, tap, step. The sound echoed in the silent room, a metronome counting down the seconds of William's professional life. Preston stepped back, giving me the center stage. He knew his place. He knew who signed the checks. I walked past the microphone on the floor. I did not bend down to pick it up. A stagehand rushed out from the wings, terrified and eager, and handed me a fresh wireless mic. I took it without looking at him. I turned to the audience. I looked at the faces in the crowd. I saw shock. I saw confusion. But mostly, I saw fear. They were realizing that if they had underestimated me, perhaps they had underestimated everything else about this company. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice booming through the high-end sound system, rich and steady. "I apologize for the theatrical interruption. My son-in-law here seems to have forgotten to introduce me properly." I turned slowly to face William. He was shaking. Sweat was pouring down his face, ruining his makeup, staining his collar. "You are confused," William whispered, his voice picked up by my microphone. "You are sick. Go back to the basement." I smiled. It was not a warm smile. "I am afraid the basement is undergoing renovations, William," I said, "just like this company." I raised my hand and snapped my fingers. Up in the control booth, my IT director, a young woman named Sarah, whom I had hired personally 3 years ago, executed the command I had given her an hour before. The massive LED screen behind William flickered. The polished graphics of his investment pitch, the soaring graphs and buzzwords about synergy and growth vanished instantly. The screen went black for a heartbeat. Then it lit up with a spreadsheet. It was not a pretty spreadsheet. It was raw data, rows and columns of red numbers, bank routing codes, timestamp transfers. It was a forensic audit of William's activities for the last 18 months. A gasp rippled through the crowd. These were financial people. They knew what they were looking at. They saw the shell companies. They saw the siphoned funds. They saw the theft. William spun around. He saw the screen. He let out a strangled cry. "Turn it off," he screamed at the booth. "Turn it off right now. It is a lie. It is a glitch." I walked closer to the screen, using my cane to point at a specific column. "Let us look at line item 429, I said, my voice taking on the clinical detached tone of a structural engineer analyzing a point of failure. "Transfer of $200,000 to an offshore account in the Caymans listed under the entity Solaris Holdings." I turned to William. "Solaris Holdings does not exist." "Does it, William? It is a shell, a ghost, and the IP address used to authorize this transfer matches the Wi-Fi network of your home address, my home address." William backed away, shaking his head frantically. No, that is administrative overhead. That is consulting fees." "You do not understand how this works, old man. You are a bricklayer. You are a laborer. This is high finance. It is complex." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Complexity is just a place for thieves to hide William. I understand structure. I understand load-bearing. And I understand that when you remove capital from the foundation to gild the penthouse, the building collapses. I signaled Sarah again. The screen changed. Now images of invoices appeared. They were crude forgeries. The logos were pixelated. The dates were misaligned. Here we have invoices for IT consulting services from a firm called Technova. I continued. $150,000 in the last quarter alone. Very impressive. Except Technova is registered to a P.O. box in a strip mall 3 miles from here. A P.O. box that is also the registered address for your online gambling account. The crowd began to murmur. The shock was turning into judgment. Phones were out. People were recording. This was the end of William's reputation. William looked at the crowd. He saw he was losing them. He turned back to me, his face twisting into a snarl of desperation. "This is fake," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He forged these. He is crazy. He has dementia. He thinks the stairs are trying to kill him. He thinks I am trying to kill him. You cannot trust a word he says. He belongs in an institution." I stepped into his personal space. I towered over him. I did not shout. I lowered my voice, forcing the room to lean in to hear me. "I do not think the stairs tried to kill me, William. I know you sawed through the stringer board, just like I know you moved $700,000 of client money into your personal accounts to cover your losses on that cryptocurrency scheme that crashed last month." William flinched as if I had slapped him. How do you know that?" he whispered. "Because I built the algorithm that tracks internal compliance," I said. "You thought the system was automated. You thought nobody was watching. But I wrote the code, William. I built the backdoor you tried to use. And I watched you every time you walked through it." I turned back to the audience. "This man has embezzled nearly $1.2 million from this firm," I announced. "He has defrauded you. He has defrauded me. And he has leveraged his own family's future to pay for his vices." William lunged. He snapped. The pressure was too much. He threw himself at me, his hands reaching for my throat, a primal scream tearing from his throat. "You ruined everything," he shrieked. He never reached me. 2 large shapes blurred from the shadows, my personal security detail. They intercepted him mid-air. One of them caught his arm, twisting it behind his back with practiced ease. The other swept his legs. William hit the stage floor hard, his face pressed against the wood. The room erupted. Shouts, gasps, flashbulbs popping. William struggled, kicking and screaming obscenities. "Let me go. I am the director. You work for me." The security guard looked up at me for instruction. I looked down at William, pinned to the floor like an insect. I leaned down, bringing the microphone close to my lips. "You are not the director, William. You are a liability. And in engineering, when we find a liability, we remove it." I straightened up and looked at Preston. "Terminate him," I said. Preston nodded. He walked over to where William lay. "William Vanderwood," Preston said formally. "You are hereby terminated for cause effective immediately. Your access is revoked. Your assets are frozen pending a federal investigation." "Federal investigation." William wheezed against the floorboards. "Yes," I said. "The FBI has been building a file on you for 6 months. I just gave them the final piece of the puzzle tonight." I motioned to the guards. "Get him out of my sight." They hauled him up. He was limp now, the fight drained out of him. He looked small. He looked broken. His expensive suit was scuffed. His hair was a mess. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw true fear in his eyes. "Why?" he whispered. "Why didn't you say anything? Why did you let me dig this hole?" I looked him dead in the eye. "You aren't fired because you are stupid, William. You are fired because you thought I was." I turned my back on him. "Take him away," I ordered. The guards dragged him off stage, his shoes squeaking on the floor, dragging him through the parted sea of the crowd, out the double doors and into the cold night where the police were waiting. I stood alone on the stage. I adjusted my cuffs. I looked out at the room full of stunned investors. Now I said, my voice calm and authoritative. "Let us discuss the future of this company, and let us start with the importance of a solid foundation." The headlights of the taxi cut through the darkness of the driveway, illuminating the snow that had begun to fall again, covering the tracks of the tow truck that had taken the Porsche hours before. William did not pay the driver. He stumbled out of the car, leaving the door open, and staggered toward the house. He was not just drunk on the cheap whiskey he had bought at a liquor store after being thrown out of the gala. He was drunk on humiliation. The memory of the laughter in the ballroom and the sight of me standing on that stage had shattered whatever sanity he had left. He fumbled with his keys, scratching the paint on the door before finally shoving the lock open. He He burst into the hallway, bringing the freezing wind with him. The house was dark and silent, the heating still cut off, but the cold inside was nothing compared to the ice in his veins. He screamed. It was a wordless, primal sound of a man who has lost everything and refuses to accept it. He grabbed a vase from the entry table, a Ming replica he had insisted Jasmine buy, and smashed it against the wall. The sound of shattering porcelain echoed through the empty house like a gunshot. Jasmine and Leo were in the living room, huddled together under a pile of blankets, trying to stay warm by the dead fireplace. They jumped at the noise. Jasmine clutched Leo to her chest, covering his ears, but the boy's eyes were wide with terror. William stormed into the room. His tie was undone, his expensive shirt stained with sweat and alcohol. He looked at them with eyes that did not see a wife and son, but witnesses to his failure. He tore the curtains from the windows, ripping the rods from the drywall. He overturned the coffee table, sending books and candles flying. He was a tornado of destruction, tearing apart the stage of the life he had pretended to live. "Get up!" he roared at them, swaying on his feet. "Get up! We are leaving! Where are we going?" Jasmine sobbed, holding Leo tighter. "William, there is nowhere to go. Please stop this. You are scaring Leo." "I said get up," William screamed. He ran to the garage door and disappeared for a moment. When he returned, he was dragging a red plastic jerry can, the one we used for the lawnmower. The smell of gasoline filled the room, instantly sharp and chemical, overpowering the scent of the spilled whiskey. He unscrewed the cap with trembling hands. "If I cannot have this house, no one can," he muttered, splashing the fuel onto the expensive Persian rug. "If they want to take it from me, let them have ashes. Let them have charcoal." He splashed gasoline onto the sofa near where Jasmine was sitting. She screamed, scrambling backward, dragging Leo with her. William did not even look at them. He was lost in his own narrative of persecution. He pulled a silver lighter from his pocket, the flame flickering to life, a tiny orange dancer reflecting in his wild eyes. "This ends tonight," he whispered, staring at the flame. The front door opened. I did not slam it. I did not run. I walked in with the steady cadence of a man inspecting a job site. The cold air swirled around me, but I did not feel it. I saw the gasoline staining the floor. I smelled the fumes. I saw my daughter cowering in the corner, shielding my grandson from the monster she had married. "Put it down, William," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried across the room, cutting through his madness like a steel beam. William spun around. He held the lighter up threateningly, but his hand shook. When he saw me, he flinched. He expected the police. He expected the guards from the gala. He did not expect me standing there alone in my tuxedo, leaning on my cane, looking at him with absolute disappointment. "You," he spat, "you are the devil. You took my life." I walked further into the room, ignoring the gasoline that slicked the hardwood floor. I stopped at the dining table, which was still standing amidst the debris. I reached into my jacket pocket. I did not pull out a weapon. I pulled out a thick manila envelope. I tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. "I did not take your life, William," I said calmly. "I just stopped you from taking mine." William stared at the envelope. The lighter flickered in his hand. "What is that?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Open it," I said. "Or are you afraid to see your own handiwork in the light?" He did not move, so I reached out with the tip of my cane and flipped the envelope open. Photographs spilled out across the table surface. They were high-resolution, glossy prints. The first one was a close-up of the wooden stairs at the mountain cabin. The saw marks were clearly visible, jagged teeth where the support beam had been compromised. The second photo was a bank document, a life insurance policy taken out on Reginald Lucas Carter 3 weeks before the trip. The beneficiary was William Vanderwood. The payout was $2 million. Jasmine gasped. She had crept closer, drawn by the photos. She looked at the image of the sawed stair. She looked at the insurance paper. She looked at her husband. The pieces fell into place. The accident, the delay in calling the ambulance, the obsession with my health, the rush to get me committed. It was not concern. It was a failed investment strategy. "You tried to kill him," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You sawed the stairs. You wanted him to die." William's face twisted. He looked from the photos to Jasmine, then back to me. He did not deny it. He could not. The evidence was right there in black and white. I had to. He screamed, his voice cracking. "Do you know what they were going to do to me? The loan sharks. The bookies. They were going to break my legs. They were going to come for you, Jasmine. They were going to come for Leo. I needed the money. $2 million would have fixed everything. He looked at me with a twisted, pleading look. You are old Lucas. You lived your life. I have a future. I have a family. You were just sitting on that money doing nothing. It was a waste. It was a resource allocation issue. I looked at him and I felt a profound sadness, not for me but for him. He was a man so hollow he thought a human life was a line item on a balance sheet. He thought murder was a business decision. It was not resource allocation, William Murray said, my voice hard as flint. It was parricide. You tried to murder the grandfather of your son to pay for your gambling addiction. You sold us out. You sold our safety. You sold your soul. William gripped the lighter tighter. His eyes darted around the room. He realized there was no way out. The truth was out. Jasmine knew. I knew. The walls were closing in. It does not matter, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. None of it matters if there is no evidence left. If the house burns, the photos burn. If the house burns, accidents happen. Old men die in fires. He lowered the lighter toward the gasoline-soaked rug. Do it then, I said. I did not move. I did not lunge for him. I stood my ground, my eyes locked on his. Light it, William. Burn it all down. But before you do, you should know one thing. William hesitated, the flame inches from the fuel. What he hissed. I pointed to my lapel. Nestled in the silk fold, barely visible, was a small black microphone. A wire ran down inside my jacket, connected to a transmitter on my belt. The police are outside, I said. They have been listening to everything for the last 10 minutes. They heard you admit to the debt. They heard you admit to the insurance fraud. And they just heard you confess to sawing the stairs. William's eyes widened. He looked at the window. Through the gap where he had torn the curtains, he saw movement in the darkness. The glint of a badge. The shadow of a tactical vest. If you drop that lighter... William, I continued, my voice calm and final, you go from attempted murder to arson and endangering a child. That is the difference between 20 years and life without parole. So go ahead. Make your choice. William stood frozen. The lighter burned his thumb, but he did not feel it. He looked at the gasoline. He looked at Jasmine, who was clutching Leo and looking at him with pure hatred. He looked at me, the old man he had underestimated. The silence stretched out tight as a piano wire. Then slowly his hand began to shake. The flame flickered and went out. The lighter clattered to the floor, rolling across the gasoline-stained wood until it hit the leg of the overturned coffee table. William dropped to his knees. It was a fluid motion, a theatrical collapse designed to elicit sympathy. He crawled toward Jasmine, ignoring the broken glass and the fumes. His hands reached out for her, trembling with a performance of remorse. Jasmine, baby, please, you have to understand. He sobbed, his voice thick with tears. I did it for us. Everything I did was for this family. The gambling, the loans, it was all to maintain this life for you. I wanted you to have the best. I wanted Leo to go to the best schools. I got in over my head, but I was trying to fix it. I was trying to save us. He looked up at her, his eyes wide and pleading. He looked like a broken man, a victim of circumstance rather than the architect of his own destruction. Your father, he does not understand the pressure, William continued, pointing a shaking finger at me without looking my way. He has old money. He does not know what it is like to fight for your place in the world. I made mistakes, yes, but I made them because I love you so much I could not bear to let you down. Please, Jasmine, don't let him destroy our marriage. Don't let him tear our family apart. We can fix this. We can go away, just the three of us. Jasmine looked down at him. Her expression softened slightly. The habit of forgiving him was deeply ingrained. For 10 years she had smoothed over his rough edges and excused his temper. She wanted to believe him. I saw the hesitation in her eyes. I saw her grip on Leo loosen just a fraction. I could not let that happen. Compassion for a predator is just an invitation to be eaten. I pulled the small remote for the audio system from my pocket. I had synced my phone to the surviving Bluetooth speakers in the living room earlier that evening while William was out trying to salvage his career. There is one more thing you need to hear, Jasmine, I said, my voice cutting through William's sobbing monologue. He says he did it for you. He says he loves you. Let us see if that holds up to scrutiny. I pressed the button. The speakers crackled to life. William flinched, looking around wildly. The voice that filled the room was unmistakable. It was William, but the tone was different. It was not the desperate, pleading voice of the man on the floor. It was arrogant, dismissive, and cruel. It was a phone call recorded 2 days ago while he was sitting in his car in the driveway thinking he was alone. "She is clueless, baby," the recording of William said. "Jasmine has no idea about the money. She thinks we are just having cash flow issues. Once the old man kicks the bucket and the insurance pays out, I am clearing the debts and I am filing for divorce." A woman's voice laughed on the recording. It was a sultry, mocking sound. "And what about the kid?" she asked. "He can stay with her," William's voice replied. "I don't need that baggage. I am taking the $2 million and we are going to Cabo. I am done playing house with a woman who bores me to tears. I am done pretending to respect her senile father. Just a few more days, baby. Just wait for the accident to settle." The recording ended with a click. The silence that followed was heavier than the air in a tomb. William stayed on his knees, but he stopped crying. The mask had slipped completely. There was no way to spin this. There was no way to gaslight his way out of a direct confession of infidelity and abandonment. He stared at the floor, his shoulders hunched, waiting for the blow. Jasmine stared at the man she had married, the man she had defended to her friends, the man she had chosen over me time and time again. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a marble statue. She slowly released Leo, pushing him gently behind her back, shielding him completely from his father. She took a step forward. Her movement was stiff, robotic. She looked at William not with love, not with confusion, but with the cold clarity of someone seeing a monster for the first time. "You were going to leave us," she whispered. It was not a question. William looked up. He opened his mouth to speak, to lie, to beg, but the look in her eyes stopped him cold. "Jasmine, he started. She moved faster than I thought possible. She swung her hand with every ounce of strength she possessed. The slap echoed through the room like a gunshot, louder than the vase breaking earlier, louder than the thunder outside. It was a strike of pure, unadulterated fury. William's head snapped to the side. A bright red handprint bloomed instantly on his cheek, matching the one he had left on my soul. He toppled sideways, falling onto his hands in the gasoline. "Get out!" Jasmine screamed. It was a primal sound, a release of 10 years of suppressed intuition. "Get out of my house! Get away from my son!" She advanced on him, her hands balled into fists. She looked like an avenging angel. "I defended you," she yelled, her voice breaking with sobs. "I told my dad he was crazy. I told him he was imagining things. I chose you, and you were laughing at me. You were planning to leave me with nothing while you spent my father's death money with some whore." William scrambled backward, Crab walking away from her fury. "Jasmine, calm down," he stammered, wiping a trickle of blood from his lip. "You are hysterical." "I am not hysterical," she roared. "I am awake. I see you, William. I finally see you. You are small, you are weak, and you are evil. I want you gone. I never want to see your face again. If you come near Leo, I will kill you myself." She pointed at the door, her fingers shaking with rage. "Go," she commanded. "Get out before I let my father finish what he started." I watched her with a swelling sense of pride. This was my daughter. This was the strength I knew was in her, buried under layers of William's manipulation. She had finally broken the chains. William pulled himself up, using the wall for support. He looked at Jasmine, panting. He looked at the red mark on his face, reflected in the dark window. His eyes narrowed. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, sneering malice. He straightened his jacket, brushing off the glass shards. He regained his composure, pulling the arrogance around him like a shield. He looked at Jasmine, and then at me. He laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You are kicking me out," he asked, his voice dripping with venom. "You are kicking me out of my own house." He shook his head, looking around the wrecked living room. "You stupid woman. Do you really think this is your house? Do you think because your name is on the deed that you own it?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He tossed a crumpled piece of paper onto the floor at her feet. "That is a notice of default, Jasmine. I didn't just spend our savings. I leveraged the equity. I took out a second mortgage, and then I took out a high-interest private loan against the property deed." He stepped closer to her, ignoring her flinch. "I haven't paid the mortgage in 6 months. I haven't paid the loans in 4. This house does not belong to us anymore. It belongs to the bank. It belongs to the sharks." He smiled, a cruel, twisted expression. "So go ahead, kick me out. You are just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. The foreclosure notice is already in the mail. By next week, the sheriff will be here to throw you and your brat out on the street. You have nothing, Jasmine. I made sure of that. If I go down, you are coming down with me. We are all going to be homeless." So enjoy your moral victory while you freeze to death under a bridge." He turned to me, his eyes gleaming with hate. "And you, old man, you bought a front-row seat to the destruction of your legacy. I hope it was worth it." He walked to the door, stepping over the gasoline-soaked rug. He put his hand on the knob and looked back one last time. "You should have just died on those stairs, Lucas. It would have been easier for everyone." He opened the door and the wind howled, masking the sound of the police sirens that were finally getting close enough to hear. He stepped out into the night thinking he had delivered the final blow, thinking he had left us in ruins. He had no idea that the man standing in the tuxedo behind him was not just a grandfather, but the new owner of the debt he had just bragged about. He thought he was leaving us to the wolves, but he was walking straight into the cage I had built for him. William flung the door open to the swirling snow and the blinding rhythm of red and blue lights. The sheriff stood on the porch, his hand resting on his holster, flanked by 2 deputies. The cold wind rushed into the hallway, swirling the gasoline fumes around William's legs, but he did not seem to notice the chill. He only saw the uniforms. He saw the badge. He saw his salvation. A manic grin stretched across his face, replacing the mask of hatred he had worn only seconds before. He turned back to look at me, his eyes gleaming with a twisted victory. "Thank God you are here," William shouted over the wind, gesturing wildly back into the house. "Officer, you need to arrest this man immediately. He has broken into my home. He is threatening my family. He is mentally unstable and dangerous." William stepped aside, playing the role of the terrified homeowner to perfection. He pointed a shaking finger at me, standing calmly by the ruined dining table in my tuxedo. "Get him out of here!" William demanded, his voice rising to a screech. "He has no right to be here. This is my property. He is trespassing. I want him in handcuffs." The sheriff did not move. He did not unholster his weapon. He did not rush past William to subdue the dangerous old man in the tuxedo. He simply stood there, a wall of blue nylon and authority, looking at William with an expression of stone. Behind the sheriff, a figure stepped out from the shadows of the porch. It was not another deputy. It was a man in a long charcoal wool coat holding a leather briefcase. He adjusted his glasses and stepped into the light. It was Blackwood. William blinked, confused. He looked from the sheriff to the lawyer, his brain struggling to process the scene. "Who are you?" William asked, his voice faltering. "I called the police. I didn't call a lawyer." The sheriff finally spoke. His voice was deep and gravelly, the voice of a man who had seen too many domestic disputes and had no patience for liars. "We didn't come here because you called Mr. Vanderwood," the sheriff said. "We are here to execute a court order." William let out a nervous laugh. "Court order? What are you talking about? I am the victim here. That man is trespassing." Blackwood stepped forward. He opened his briefcase with a sharp click that sounded like a gunshot in the frozen air. He pulled out a sheaf of documents thick and bound with legal tape. He handed them to William. "Mr. Vanderwood Blackwood," said, his tone professional and dry as dust. "These are foreclosure documents certified by the county clerk 20 minutes ago." William took the papers. His hands were shaking so hard the pages rattled. "Foreclosure," he stammered. "That takes months. You can't just foreclose in the middle of the night. I have rights. I have a grace period." "You had a grace period," Blackwood corrected him. "It expired 90 days ago when you missed your 3rd mortgage payment. However, usually you would be right. The bank would take months to process the eviction. But you do not owe the bank anymore." William looked up from the papers, his eyes wide and uncomprehending. What he whispered. "Your debt was sold this morning," Blackwood explained, pointing to a specific paragraph on the first page. The entire note, the mortgage, the second mortgage, the private liens. It was all purchased by a private entity. "And under the terms of the private lending agreement you signed to cover your gambling losses, the new creditor has the right to immediate possession upon default." William looked at the name of the creditor at the bottom of the page. He squinted in the dim porch light. "L.C. Holdings," he read aloud. "Who is L.C. Holdings?" I stepped forward. The sound of my cane tapping on the hardwood floor made William jump. I walked past the gasoline stains. I walked past my weeping daughter. I walked right up to the door until I was standing toe-to-toe with the man who had tried to bury me. "I am L.C. Holdings William," I said softly. William dropped the papers. They scattered across the snowy porch steps. He looked at me, his face draining of all color until he looked like a corpse standing upright. "You," he breathed. "That is impossible. You are broke. You are a pensioner. I am the silent partner in one of the largest infrastructure firms on the East Coast, I said, my voice steady. I have been building bridges since before you were born. And today I bought the bridge you live under. I reached out and took the papers from the porch floor, shaking the snow off them. I own the note, William. I own the interest. I own the principal. And as of 5 minutes ago, when the electronic filing went through, I own the deed. I pointed the tip of my cane at the floorboards beneath his feet. This is my floor. Those are my walls. That is my roof. I looked him in the eye. You are not the homeowner, William. You are an intruder. You are the trespasser, and you are the one the sheriff is here to remove. William staggered back. He hit the door frame. He looked at the sheriff, pleading. Officer, you can't do this. He is lying. He is tricking you. The sheriff shook his head. I have seen the paperwork, son. It is airtight. The judge signed off on it himself. You are illegally occupying this residence. You have been served. William looked at Jasmine. She was standing into the hallway holding Leo. She wasn't looking at him with fear anymore. She was looking at him with the cold detachment of a stranger. Jasmine, William begged, reaching out a hand. Tell them this is our house. Tell them we are married. Jasmine stepped back, pulling Leo with her. It is Dad's house, William, she said quietly. It always was. You just never realized it. The reality finally crashed down on him. The weight of it buckled his knees. He slid down the door frame until he was sitting on the porch, the snow soaking into his expensive trousers. He looked at his hands. He looked at the driveway where his car used to be. He looked at the dark windows of the house. I have nothing, he whispered. You have your freedom for the moment, I said. Though given what the sheriff heard on the wiretap regarding the arson attempt and the insurance fraud, I doubt that will last long. I checked my watch. It was the Patek Philippe. The gold caught the light of the police cruisers. It is now 10:15, I announced. I looked down at William, huddled on my porch. You have 10 minutes, I said. William looked up. Hope flickered in his eyes for a second. 10 minutes. To what? To fix this? To pay you back? No, I said, my voice cutting through the cold air like a razor. 10 minutes to collect your personal effects. I leaned in closer. But let me be very specific about what constitutes personal effects, William. You may take the clothes on your back. You may take your toiletries. You may take any photos that do not include my daughter or my grandson. I straightened up. Everything else stays. The furniture, the electronics, the jewelry you bought with our joint accounts, the watches, the art. It all stays. It is collateral against the damage you have done to this property and the money you stole from my family. William scrambled to his feet. You can't do that. My laptop is in there. My work files. My contacts. Your laptop was purchased with company funds, I reminded him. You were terminated for cause. That is company property. And since I am the chairman of the board, I am reclaiming it. He lunged for the door, trying to push past me. I need my things, he screamed. The sheriff stepped forward, his hand heavy on William's shoulder. He held him back effortlessly. 10 minutes, son, the sheriff said, and I will be escorting you. If you touch anything that isn't a shirt or a pair of socks, I will arrest you for theft right here and now. William looked at the sheriff. He looked at Blackwood. He looked at me. He saw the wall of power arrayed against him. He saw the trap he had walked into. He saw the structural failure of his entire life. He let out a sob. It was a pathetic, broken sound. Fine, he choked out. Fine. He walked past me into the house. He moved like a man walking to the gallows. The sheriff followed him closely, his hand hovering near his belt. I stood in the doorway watching him go. I watched him walk past the gasoline stains he had made. I watched him walk past the wife he had betrayed and the son he had threatened. He didn't look at them. He couldn't. He kept his eyes on the floor, ashamed, defeated, and utterly alone. I turned to Blackwood. Change the locks the second he steps off the property, I said. Blackwood nodded. Already arranged, Mr. Carter. The locksmith is in the van down the street. I looked at Jasmine. She was still trembling, but she was standing tall. She came over to me and buried her face in my chest. I am sorry, Dad, she whispered. I am so sorry. I held her tight, ignoring the pain in my ribs. It is over, baby girl, I said. The foundation was rotten. We had to tear it down. But now we can build something real. I looked at the clock on the wall. 9 minutes left. I listened to the sounds of drawers being ripped open upstairs. I listened to the frantic footsteps of a man trying to pack a life into a gym bag. I did not feel joy. I did not feel triumph. I felt the cold satisfaction of a job done right. I felt the balance sheet correcting itself. William had spent years trying to erase me. He had tried to turn me into a ghost in my own life. Now he was the ghost. He was fading away minute by minute, dollar by dollar, untethered and drifting into the cold, dark night he had wished upon me. 7 minutes. I walked into the living room and picked up the poker from the fireplace. I walked over to the window and smashed the remaining glass out of the frame, letting the clean, cold air rush into the gasoline-filled room. "We need to air this place out," I said to no one in particular. "It is time for a fresh start." William sprinted up the stairs, taking 2 at a time, his desperation giving him a frantic energy. I stood at the bottom of the landing, leaning on my cane, listening to the sounds of destruction raining down from the master bedroom. Drawers were ripped from their tracks and thrown against the walls. Hangers clattered onto the hardwood floor. It sounded less like packing and more like looting. He was not looking for essentials, he was looking for anything he could fence at a pawn shop in the morning. He reappeared at the top of the stairs 3 minutes later, carrying a designer leather gym bag that was bulging at the seams. He tried to rush past me, his eyes fixed on the front door, but I moved my cane, blocking his path. "Open the bag, William," I said calmly. He stopped, his chest heaving. "These are my clothes," he spat. "You said I could take my clothes." "Open it," I repeated, "or the sheriff opens it for you." William glared at the sheriff, who was standing by the door, his hand resting casually on his belt. William growled and unzipped the bag. On top of a pile of silk ties and cashmere sweaters sat a heavy silver sculpture that usually resided on the mantel. Next to it was a jewelry box. I reached in and pulled out the box. I opened it to reveal a diamond tennis bracelet. "This," I said, holding it up to the light, "does not fit you, William." "I bought that," he shouted. "It is mine. I gave it to Jasmine. You bought it with the joint savings account 3 days after you drained the college fund I set up for Leo." I corrected him. "You stole from your son to buy a trinket for your wife to cover up your gambling. It stays." I tossed the box to Jasmine, who caught it with a numb expression. I reached back into the bag and pulled out the silver sculpture. "This belongs to the house," I said. "It is listed on the inventory of assets attached to the foreclosure. It stays." I pulled out a thick leather folio. I opened it. It contained his passport and a stack of cash. I handed him the passport, but I took the cash. "This is $5,000, I noted, counting the bills quickly. "Interesting, since you told the bankruptcy court yesterday that you had 0 liquid assets. This goes to the creditors." William lunged for the cash, but the sheriff stepped forward, blocking him with a wall of blue uniform. William backed down, seething. He zipped the bag back up, his hands shaking. He marched toward the door, but stopped at the small console table in the hallway. On it sat a ceramic pig painted blue. It was Leo's piggy bank. William reached out and grabbed it. I stepped in front of him again. "Put it down," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "It is my loose change," William sneered, clutching the pig to his chest. "It is my money." "It is a 7-year-old boy's birthday money," I said. "It is the tooth fairy money. It is the money he saved from shoveling snow." "I need it!" William screamed, his voice cracking. "I have nothing. I need cab fare. I need to eat." "You are stealing from your child," I said, looking him in the eyes with absolute disgust. "You are robbing a child to buy whiskey. Put it down, or so help me God, I will forget that I am a civilized man." William looked at me. Then he looked at the sheriff. Then he looked at Leo, who was peeking out from behind Jasmine's legs. William sneered and spiked the ceramic pig onto the hardwood floor. It shattered into 100 pieces, scattering coins and a few crumpled dollar bills across the entryway. There he yelled, "Happy now! Keep the pennies!" The sound of the shattering pottery seemed to break something inside William. The last vestige of the sophisticated banker, the facade of the loving father, the mask of the misunderstood victim, it all dissolved. What was left was ugly, raw, and hateful. He looked at me, and for the first time he did not see a creditor or a father-in-law. He saw a black man in a tuxedo standing in a house that William felt belonged to him by right of birth and complexion. "You think you have won," he hissed, stepping closer to me, ignoring the sheriff's warning gesture. "You think because you have money now you are better than me. You are nothing. You are just a diversity hire who got lucky." He spat on the floor near my shoes. "I took you in," he screamed, his face turning a violent shade of purple. I let you live in my basement. I gave you a roof over your head. You should have been grateful. You people are always looking for a handout, and when you don't get it, you steal what belongs to us." The racial slur hung in the air, heavy and toxic. He didn't use the word, but the intent was clear in his tone, in his eyes, in the way he curled his lip. He called me "you people" with a venom that dated back centuries. Jasmine gasped. She covered her mouth with her hand. She had spent 10 years convincing herself that William was not like that he was modern, that he was colorblind. Now the truth was screaming in her face. William turned to her, his eyes wild. "And you," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at his wife, "you let him do this. You chose him over me. You chose your own kind over your husband. I should have left you years ago. I should have found someone who knows her place. You are weak, Jasmine. You are just like him. Dirty." Leo stepped out from behind Jasmine. He walked over to where the coins were scattered on the floor. He picked up a quarter. He looked at his father. He didn't cry. He didn't run. He just looked at William with a cold, mature disappointment that no 7-year-old should ever have to feel. "You are a bad man," Leo said quietly. William flinched as if the boy had thrown a stone at him. He looked at his son, and for a second I saw a flicker of shame, but he crushed it immediately, replacing it with rage. "Shut up," he snarled at the boy. "You don't know anything. You are just a half-breed mistake." That was it. The sheriff moved. He didn't wait for my signal. He grabbed William by the shoulder and spun him around, slamming him against the doorframe. "That is enough," the sheriff barked. "You are done here." I looked at William pinned against the wood, his face pressed into the frame. "You finally showed them," I said softly. "You spent 10 years wearing a mask, William. Thank you for finally taking it off. Now my daughter knows. Now my grandson knows. You didn't just lose a house tonight. You lost your legacy." The sheriff checked his watch. "Time is up, Mr. Vanderwood," the sheriff said. He grabbed William by the collar of his coat and hauled him upright. He didn't bother to be gentle. He marched him to the open door. "My bag." William cried, reaching back for the leather gym bag he had dropped when he smashed the piggy bank. "I need my bag." I picked up the bag. I walked to the door. I looked outside. It was snowing harder now, a white curtain erasing the world. I unzipped the bag. I turned it upside down. The clothes, the silk ties, the cashmere sweaters fell onto the wet, snowy porch. "Oops," I said without emotion. "Clumsy old man." I tossed the empty leather bag onto the pile of clothes. "Get out, William," I said. The sheriff shoved him. William stumbled down the steps, slipping on the ice, landing hard on his knees in the pile of his own expensive clothing. He scrambled up, shivering instantly as the wind cut through his thin shirt. He looked back at the warm yellow light spilling from the hallway. He looked at Jasmine, who had turned her back on him. He looked at Leo, who was busy picking up his coins. And he looked at me, standing guard at the threshold. He opened his mouth to scream again, but the cold stole his breath. He grabbed a handful of shirts, clutching them to his chest like a shield. He had no car. He had no money. He had no phone. He stood alone in the driveway of the house he had leveraged and lost, a king of nothing, wearing wet socks in the snow. He turned and began to walk down the long, dark driveway toward the main road. His shoulders were hunched against the wind. He disappeared into the white, swirling darkness, leaving only a set of footprints that the snow was already beginning to fill. I watched until he was gone. Then I closed the heavy oak door. I turned the deadbolt. The click was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I turned back to the room. The air was still thick with the memory of his hate, but it was already starting to clear. "It is over," I said to Jasmine and Leo. "We have a lot of cleaning to do." The wind was not the only thing biting William that night as he trudged away from the estate he used to pretend was his. The cold reality of his new existence was setting in with every step he took through the accumulating snow. He walked for 3 miles, his expensive leather loafers slipping on the ice until he reached a 24-hour gas station on the edge of the highway. He was shivering violently, his lips blue, and his hands clutching the bundle of silk shirts to his chest like a life raft. He stumbled inside the fluorescent lights, humming a harsh welcome. The clerk behind the counter looked up from his phone, eyeing William's disheveled state with suspicion. William ignored him and went straight to the coffee machine, pouring a cup with shaking hands. He grabbed a sandwich from the cooler. He approached the counter and pulled a credit card from his pocket, one he had hidden in his sock, one he thought I hadn't found. He swiped it. The machine beeped a sharp rejection. He swiped it again harder. Declined. He looked at the clerk. his eyes wild. "Run it again," he demanded, his voice cracking. "It is a platinum card." The clerk shook his head and pointed to the door. "No pay, no stay, buddy. Get out." William screamed. He threw the coffee across the counter, the hot liquid splashing against the display case. He ran out before the clerk could call the police. He stood in the parking lot hyperventilating. He pulled out his phone, but the screen was dark, service suspended. He had no money, he had no friends. The people he had impressed with champagne toasts would not answer a collect call from a payphone at 2 a.m. He was a ghost. A man sitting in a running sedan at the pump stepped out to buy a pack of cigarettes, leaving the engine idling, and the door cracked open. William did not think. He did not plan. He reacted with the instinct of a trapped animal. He dropped his bundle of shirts into the snow and sprinted for the car. He jumped into the driver's seat and slammed the door. He peeled out of the lot tires, screeching against the asphalt, leaving his old life and his dignity freezing in the slush behind him. He turned onto the interstate, heading north toward the state line. He thought he was escaping. He thought he could outrun his debt. He did not realize he had just upgraded his status from debtor to felon. While William was driving a stolen Honda Civic with a broken heater toward the border, I was sitting in the warm, mahogany-paneled office of the district attorney. It was 8 a.m. The sun was shining on the fresh snow outside, but inside the mood was grave. Blackwood sat next to me, laying out the timeline of events with the precision of a surgeon. I sat across from D.A. Miller, a woman known for her zero-tolerance policy on white-collar crime. She looked at the documents spread across her desk. There were the loan applications William had signed using my name. There were the forged property deeds he had used to secure high-interest loans from the shadow lenders. And then there was the centerpiece of our presentation. I placed the small SD card on her desk. "This is the audio from the night before the accident," I said. Miller put on her headphones. I watched her face as she listened. I saw her jaw tighten. I saw her eyes narrow. She heard the saw. She heard the premeditation. She heard a man discussing the murder of his father-in-law as if it were a renovation project. She took off the headphones and looked at me. "This is not just fraud, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice quiet with suppressed rage. "This is conspiracy to commit capital murder." I nodded. "He tried to kill me for the insurance money," I said. "And when that failed, he tried to have me committed to a state facility to silence me." Miller picked up her phone. She dialed the police commissioner directly. "I want an APB on William Vanderwood," she ordered. "Grand theft auto, bank fraud, identity theft, and attempted first-degree murder. Consider him armed and dangerous." She hung up and looked at me. "We will find him, Mr. Carter. He is not going to slip away." The wheels of justice had been grinding slowly for years, but now they were spinning at full speed. The state police were alerted. The highway patrol was notified. William's face was flashed to every patrol car in the tri-state area. He was running a race he had already lost. He made it 60 miles. He was crossing the bridge over the river that marked the state line when he saw them. A wall of blue lights blocking the exit ramp. He looked in his rearview mirror. 3 cruisers were closing in behind him. He was boxed in. For a second, he considered ramming the blockade. He considered driving off the bridge. But William was a coward at heart. He slammed on the brakes, the stolen car fishtailing on the icy bridge before slamming into the concrete barrier. The airbag deployed, filling the cabin with white dust. Before the dust settled, the doors were ripped open. He was dragged out onto the cold pavement. He did not fight. He just wept. He lay there, face pressed against the road, handcuffed, screaming that it was all a mistake, that he was a victim. A news helicopter hovered overhead, its camera zooming in on the scene. Back at the house, Jasmine, Leo, and I sat in the living room watching the television. The breaking news banner flashed red across the bottom of the screen. High-speed chase ends in arrest of disgraced financier. The camera cut to the live feed from the bridge. We saw William being hauled to his feet. He looked pathetic. His coat was torn. His face was covered in white powder from the airbag. He looked directly into the news camera, his eyes wide with terror, and for a moment it felt like he was looking right at us. He was shouting something, but the wind on the bridge drowned it out. They shoved him into the back of a squad car, his head bowing to clear the doorframe. It was the final image of his career. The man who cared more about appearances than anything else in the world was being broadcast to millions in the lowest moment of his life. Jasmine turned off the TV. The screen went black, erasing him from the room. She looked at me, and then she looked at Leo. She pulled her son close. "It is over," she whispered. I nodded. "Yes," I said. "The storm has passed." William was gone. He was no longer a husband or a father or a son-in-law. He was just a case number, a cautionary tale. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered yard. The sun was high now, melting the ice. The driveway was empty. The house was quiet. For the first time in 10 years, the air in the room felt clean. We had survived the collapse. Now it was time to clear the rubble. The silence that filled the house in the days following William's arrest was not peaceful. It was heavy with the wreckage of a decade of deception. Jasmine sat at the dining room table, surrounded by mountains of paperwork that detailed the financial ruin her husband had left behind. There were foreclosure notices on credit lines she didn't know existed, liens against her car, and demands for payment from creditors who were not polite. She looked pale and thin, her eyes rimmed with red from sleepless nights spent worrying about how she would feed Leo or keep the lights on. She felt the crushing weight of joint liability because William had forged her signature on so many documents that the forensic accountants were still untangling the web. She looked up at me as I entered the room, her expression a mixture of shame and despair. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I am so sorry. I let this happen. I was so blind. I thought he was a genius investor, but he was just a con artist, and I signed whatever he put in front of me because I trusted him." She buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. I walked over and pulled out the chair next to her, sitting down with a groan as my healing ribs protested the movement. I placed a hand on her shoulder, letting her cry it out because the poison needed to leave the wound before it could heal. "Jasmine," I said softly when her sobs subsided into hiccups, "you were not blind, you were loyal, and loyalty is a virtue until it is given to the wrong person. William weaponized your trust. He used your love as a shield to hide his crimes. Do not blame yourself for the actions of a predator." She wiped her eyes with a tissue, looking at me with confusion. "But why did you wait?" she asked. "You knew about the money. You knew about the gambling. Why did you let it get this bad? Why did you let him humiliate us before you stopped him?" It was the question I had been dreading, but I owed her the truth. I took a deep breath. "Because if I had saved you 6 months ago, you would have hated me," I explained. "If I had just paid off his debts, he would have done it again, and you would have defended him. You would have thought I was a controlling father trying to ruin your marriage. You needed to see the saw marks on the stairs. You needed to hear the recording of him planning to abandon you. You needed to see him choose a piggy bank over his son. I had to let the house burn down so you would finally run out the door. It broke my heart to watch you suffer, but it was the only way to break the spell." Jasmine looked at me, processing my words. She realized I was right. If I had intervened earlier, she would have chosen William. She reached out and took my hand, squeezing it tight. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving us, even when I didn't want to be saved." The next morning I called Jasmine into the study. The room still smelled faintly of William's cigars, but I had opened the windows to let the fresh winter air clear out the stench of his presence. Blackwood was there, standing by the desk with a fresh stack of documents. Jasmine looked nervous, bracing herself for more bad news, more debts, more lawsuits. I gestured for her to sit. "Jasmine," I said, standing by the window, looking out at the snow-covered lawn, "we need to talk about the future. Specifically, we need to talk about this house." She flinched. "I know," she said, her voice dull. "The bank owns it now. I have started looking for apartments. I think I can find a 2-bedroom in the city if I get a second job." I shook my head. "You are not moving," I said. I turned to Blackwood, who slid a thick document across the desk toward her. "This is a deed transfer," Blackwood stated professionally. "Your father has exercised his right as the sole creditor to seize the property. He has cleared the title, paid off the liens, and satisfied the outstanding mortgage." Jasmine stared at the paper. "You paid it off," she breathed. "All of it." "Yes," I said, walking over to the desk. "But this is not a gift, Jasmine. Read the second page." She turned the page, her eyes scanning the legal text. "It is a transfer of ownership," I continued. "I am putting the house in your name. It is yours free and clear. But there is a catch. It is called a protective trust clause. You cannot sell this house. You cannot leverage this house. You cannot take out a second mortgage or a home equity line of credit against this house without the express written consent of the trust administrator, which is me and eventually Leo. If you ever marry again, your spouse gets 0 equity in this property. This house is a fortress for you and your son, and it will never be gambled away again." Jasmine looked up, tears streaming down her face again, but this time they were tears of relief. "Dad, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything," I said. "Just sign." She signed the papers, her hand steady. But I wasn't done. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a check. It was a cashier's check made out to her. I placed it on top of the deed. The amount was $100,000. "This is not for shoes," I said sternly. "This is not for vacations. This is seed money. You have a degree in graphic design that you haven't used in 10 years because William wanted a trophy wife, not a partner. You are going to start your own firm. You are going to build your own income. You are going to be independent so that no man can ever hold a checkbook over your head again." Jasmine looked at the check, then at me. She stood up and hugged me, burying her face in my shoulder. "I promise," she sobbed. "I won't let you down." "I know," I said, patting her back. "Because you are a Carter, and Carters build things that last." 2 days later, the peace of our new beginning was shattered by a pounding on the front door. It was aggressive, demanding, and relentless. I saw Jasmine tense up, fear flashing in her eyes. I motioned for her to stay in the kitchen with Leo. I picked up my cane, not because I needed it, but because it added a certain weight to my presence, and walked to the door. I opened it to find a middle-aged couple standing on the porch, huddled in expensive coats against the cold. It was William's parents, Richard and Barbara Vanderwood. They looked furious, their faces red from the wind and indignation. They did not wait for an invitation. "Where is he?" Barbara shrieked, pushing past me into the hallway. "Where is my son? We know you did this. You ruined him." Richard followed her, puffing out his chest, trying to look intimidating. "You people are vicious," he spat. "William told us everything. How you tricked him, how you entrapped him, how you stole his house and threw him out in the snow like a dog. We are going to sue you for everything you have. We want him released immediately, and we want this house back." I closed the door, calmly shutting out the cold. I turned to face them. I did not raise my voice. I did not shout. I simply looked at them with the cold, hard stare of a man who had stared down corrupt contractors and structural failures his entire life. "You are not going to sue anyone," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "And you are certainly not getting this house back. Your son is in a jail cell because he is a thief, a liar, and an attempted murderer." Barbara gasped, clutching her pearls in a cliché of shock. "That is a lie," she screamed. "William is a good boy. He would never hurt anyone. He just had some bad luck. You probably drove him to it with your demands." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Bad luck," I repeated. "Is sawing through a staircase bad luck? Is taking out a life insurance policy on your father-in-law bad luck? Is forging your wife's signature to steal her credit bad luck? No, Barbara. That is not bad luck. That is character. And looking at you two, I can see exactly where he got it. You enabled him. You taught him that appearances matter more than integrity. You bailed him out of every mistake he ever made until he thought he was untouchable. You created a monster who thought the world owed him a living." Richard stepped forward, raising a finger. "You listen to me," he started. I cut him off, slamming the tip of my cane onto the floor with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. "No, you listen to me," I thundered, my voice filling the entryway. "Your son stole my money. He abused my daughter. He threatened my grandson. He called me racial slurs in this very hallway when his mask finally slipped. He is rotting in a cell because that is where he belongs. And if you ever step foot on my property again, if you ever try to contact my daughter or my grandson, I will release the full audio recordings of William describing exactly what he thinks of you two. Oh yes, he talked about you. He called you ATM machines. He called you gullible fools who would pay his legal bills until you were dry. Do you want to hear it?" I pulled out my phone. Barbara turned pale. Richard stopped mid-step. They knew their son. Deep down, they knew exactly who he was. They looked at each other, their anger deflating into shame and fear. "Get out of my house," I said, pointing the cane at the door, "and take your failure of a son's legacy with you. Go hire him a lawyer. Go waste your retirement savings trying to keep him out of prison, but do not ever come back here." Richard glared at me, but he grabbed Barbara's arm and pulled her toward the door. They opened it, and the winter wind rushed in again, cleansing the house of their perfume and their entitlement. They walked out into the snowheads, bowed, defeated by the truth. I slammed the door and locked it. I turned around to find Jasmine standing in the hallway entrance. She had heard everything. She looked at me and smiled a genuine smile of strength. "Good riddance," she said. I nodded. "We are done with the past," I said. "Now let us get back to building the future." The snow fell softly outside the bay window, but this time it did not look cold or threatening. It looked like a blanket of peace covering the scars of the past. It was Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year since the night I exposed William and reclaimed my life. The house smelled different now. Gone were the sterile, pretentious scents of expensive cologne and fear. The air was thick with the aroma of roasted turkey sage stuffing and the sweet scent of sweet potato pie baking in the oven. I sat at the head of the table, but the heavy mahogany monstrosity William had loved was gone. We had replaced it with a round oak table, solid and welcoming, where no one had to sit at a drafty corner. The dining room walls, which used to be a cold, stark gray, were now painted a warm cream color adorned with Leo's drawings framed proudly alongside my engineering degrees. Jasmine walked in from the kitchen carrying a steaming platter. She looked radiant. The shadows under her eyes were gone, replaced by the glow of a woman who owned her own destiny. Her graphic design firm was thriving, and for the first time in a decade she was paying her own bills and making her own choices. She placed the turkey on the table and smiled at me. It was a genuine smile, not the terrified, appeasing look she used to give William. Leo ran into the room, his laughter bouncing off the walls. He was 8 now, taller, and filled with a confidence that had been stifled under his father's tyranny. He climbed into the chair next to me, not afraid of making a mess or being too loud. "This is the best Christmas ever," Grandpa Leo announced, eyeing the pie. "It certainly is," I agreed, my heart swelling with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fireplace. We ate and we talked. We didn't talk about stock markets or appearances or what the neighbors thought. We talked about Leo's school project. We talked about Jasmine's new client. We talked about the future. The conversation flowed easily, unburdened by secrets or lies. I looked around the room and realized that the house finally felt like a home. It wasn't a showpiece anymore. It was a fortress of love built on a foundation of truth. The ghosts of the past had been exorcised not by a priest, but by the sunlight of honesty. I took a sip of cider, feeling the liquid warm my chest. My ribs were fully healed now, leaving only a dull ache when the weather turned very cold, a reminder of the lesson I had learned. But tonight, even that ache was gone. Earlier that morning, I had made a trip that served as the final punctuation mark on the previous chapter of my life. I had driven 2 hours north to the maximum security state penitentiary. The visiting room was cold and smelled of industrial cleaner and despair. I sat on a metal stool looking through a thick plexiglass window. On the other side sat William. He looked 20 years older. His hair, once perfectly styled, was thinning and gray. His skin was sallow from lack of sunlight and poor nutrition. The arrogance that had defined him, the sneer that had been his trademark, was completely gone. In its place was a desperate, hollow look of a man who had nothing left to trade. When he picked up the receiver, his hand shook. "Lucas," he rasped, his voice thin and reedy. "Thank you for coming. I knew you would come. You are a Christian man. You believe in forgiveness." I looked at him calmly. I felt no anger. I felt no pity. I only felt the detached, objective observation of an engineer looking at a collapsed structure. "I believe in redemption," William said into the phone. "But redemption requires payment." "I can pay," he said eagerly, leaning forward until his breath fogged the glass. "I have a plan. I have been talking to some guys in here. If I can just get a better lawyer, I can get a retrial. The evidence was circumstantial. The recording was entrapment. I just need $50,000 for the retainer. Just a loan, Lucas. I will pay you back double." He was still doing it. Even in a cage wearing a jumpsuit, he was still trying to hustle. He still thought he could talk his way out of gravity. "There will be no money, William," I said, my voice flat. "And there will be no retrial. I spoke to the district attorney yesterday. Your plea deal is finalized. 20 years for attempted murder, fraud, and grand larceny. You will be eligible for parole when Leo is 28 years old." William's face crumbled. He slammed his fist against the glass, but it was a weak, pathetic gesture. 20 years, he whispered. "I will die in here." "You might." I agreed. "But while you are in here, you will not be hurting my daughter. You will not be stealing from my grandson, and you will not be pushing anyone down any stairs." I stood up. I came here to tell you one thing, William. I have set up a trust fund for Leo. It is substantial. It will pay for his education, his first home, his future. But there is a clause, a single unbreakable ironclad clause. Not 1 cent of that money can ever be used for your legal fees, your commissary, or your debts. If Leo ever gives you a dime, the trust dissolves and goes to charity. I have engineered it so you can never parasitize him again. William stared at me, hatred warring with hopelessness in his eyes. You are a cruel old man, he spat. No, William, I said, hanging up the phone. I am just structural reinforcement. I walked out of the prison and I did not look back. The steel doors clanged shut behind me, sealing away the toxicity that had poisoned my family for too long. The air outside was crisp and clean. I got into my car and drove home, leaving William to the silence of his cell and the weight of his choices. Back in the living room, Leo was sitting on the rug, surrounded by a massive set of architectural building blocks I had bought him for Christmas. He was trying to build a tower, but it kept leaning to the side. He frowned, frustrated, his little hands trying to hold the pieces together by force. It keeps falling, Grandpa, he complained. It is broken. I lowered myself onto the rug next to him, ignoring the stiffness in my knees. It isn't broken, Leo, I said softly. It just has a weak foundation. I took the blocks apart. Look here, I said, pointing to the base. You are trying to build high before you build wide. You are trying to be flashy before you are stable. That is how buildings fall down. And that is how people fall down too. I picked up a square block. This block represents truth, I told him. It is heavy. It is hard. But it holds everything up. I placed it on the rug. I picked up another one. This one is integrity. It means doing what you say you will do even when no one is watching. I placed it next to the truth. And this one, I said, placing a third block across them, is love. Real love. Not the kind that says nice things and does bad things, but the kind that protects, the kind that stands firm when the wind blows. Leo watched me, his eyes wide and attentive, absorbing every word. Your father, I said carefully, wanted to build a castle in the sky, but he didn't want to do the work of laying the foundation. He wanted to trick gravity. But gravity always wins, Leo. The truth always wins. I guided his hands, helping him place the blocks correctly, interlocking them, creating a structure that was solid and unshakable. Real strength isn't about being the loudest or the toughest, I told him. It isn't about pushing people down to make yourself look taller. Real strength is about bearing the load. It is about protecting the people you love with your mind and your heart and your truth. It is about building something that lasts. Leo nodded, solemn understanding dawning on his face. We worked together for an hour, building a bridge that spanned the length of the rug. When we were done, it was magnificent. It is strong now, Grandpa Leo said proudly. Yes, it is, I smiled. Just like you. Jasmine came in from the dining room carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. She handed one to me and one to Leo. She sat down on the sofa watching us, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. I looked at my daughter. I looked at my grandson. I looked at the warm, safe home we had reclaimed. I thought about the journey that had brought us here, the pain, the betrayal, the fear. And I knew it was all worth it. I had to break down the old structure to build this new one. I raised my mug. To foundations, I said. To foundations, Leo echoed, clinking his mug against mine. We drank the chocolate, and then Leo tackled me in a bear hug, laughing as we toppled over onto the rug. Jasmine laughed too, a free, joyous sound that filled the room. The fire in the hearth crackled, casting a warm, golden light over us. Outside, the snow continued to fall, burying the past. Inside, we were building the future one block at a time. And this time, we were building it to last forever. My life taught me that silence is often louder than a scream. For years, William mistook my patience for weakness and my kindness for stupidity. He built a life on the quicksand of lies and debt, believing appearances were enough to sustain him. But physics, like karma, is unforgiving. You cannot cheat gravity and you cannot outrun the truth. Real power doesn't come from humiliation or dominance. It comes from the quiet confidence of knowing exactly who you are. Build your life on a foundation of integrity. And when the storms come, and they always do, you will be the one still standing. If you enjoyed seeing justice served cold, hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more stories about resilience and retribution.